Sometimes a mystery is just a question without an answer, but more often, it is the silence after the answers have run out. The world is full of events that are unexplained because they were ignored, or misfiled, or they were too inconvenient. They remained in protocols, radio interference, broken watches, and other people's voices. There is no fantasy in these stories, only reality that no one wanted to look too closely at. In this selection of 72 unsolved mysteries, we will touch on topics that people prefer to keep silent about. Jenny's ghost ship. In the early autumn of 1840, the English whaling ship Hope was moving through the icy waters of the South Atlantic when a black dot appeared in the fog ahead, a bark frozen in the ice. She didn't respond to signals. She didn't maneuver. She didn't drift. She just stood there as if she was waiting. The captain of the Hope decided to come closer. The ship was completely frozen, motionless, but visually, she was fine. The name written on the stern read, Jenny, London. None of the crew knew her. When they came aboard, everything looked wrong. The deck was silent, no destruction, no chaos, no signs of a struggle. Just a dead silence, soaking into the canvas. The men lay in their places, one at the wheel, two in the cabin, covered with blankets. One of the officers would later write in his log, "They did not look dead, they looked frozen in the moment." The main thing found on board was the captain's log. The last entry was dated May 17, 1823. The Jenny had 17 years of silence behind her. The captain wrote that the ship was trapped in ice in the Drake Passage. He described attempts to escape, then the cold, death, loneliness. The last phrase, "God have mercy on us, not one remains." How the ship had drifted across the Southern Ocean for so many years, without any trace of destruction, without being completely sunk, no one could explain. Even less clear was how the bodies had been preserved, without rotting, without distortion, as if the ice itself had decided to preserve the memory. After that, the Jenny disappeared from history as she had appeared. The ship was not towed, nor was it listed in the maritime registers. There is nothing about her in the official British archives, only scattered newspaper reports in Hamburg, London, and Chile, and references to letters that were never seen again. Some historians consider this a fabrication, but almost everyone who has studied the issue more deeply agrees on one thing. This is not an urban legend. This is history that was decided not to be touched. The question isn't where Jenny was drifting. It's why she ended up where she wasn't supposed to disappear. She didn't come back. She was brought back. Human pillars in Aokigahara Forest. At the foot of Mount Fuji, among the damp, mossy rocks and dense tangles of roots, lies a forest that the Japanese call Jukai, the sea of trees. Tourists know it as Aokigahara. Guides warn, it is too quiet there. You lose your bearings there. The compass does not work there. But the strangest discoveries begin not on the surface, but in the depths. Since the 1980s, Forest Service employees have begun to record abnormally dense areas of tree growths in certain areas, similar to protruding cylinders. They rise from the ground strictly vertically, have the same diameter, and a smooth structure. In appearance, they are charred wood covered with porous bark, but laboratory analysis reveals that these structures contain bones. These are not ordinary burials. The pillars do not rot. They do not collapse when cut. The remains inside are often incomplete, fragmentary, sometimes only a skull, sometimes only a pelvis or ribs, but none of the samples showed signs of burial, and strangest of all, many of them date back to different decades. In one case, a pathologist found bone fragments in the sample, with signs of radiation typical of nuclear accidents. In another, a dental filling identifier used only in the 1950s. But the pillar itself is young, according to biologists, about 20 years old. The discrepancy between the ages of the bodies and the wood raises questions that remain unanswered. One of the Forest Service employees who worked in Aokigahara for almost 30 years said, "In some places the poles grow as if in a circle. Inside it is empty. No mushrooms, no grass, no trash, only silence. There are no birds or wind. There, in his words, you can feel the attention." There is a theory that the forest recycles the dead, not in a metaphorical sense. Literally, it transforms remains into tree forms, not as a parasite, but as a memory. Local monks do not recommend touching these places, not out of superstition, but because interfering with the structure can be perceived not as a mistake, but as an insult. What exactly is happening in the depths of Aokigahara, no one knows. Neither geologists, nor ecologists, nor historians have given a convincing explanation. Maybe it is a process, maybe it is a punishment, Or maybe it is a way to prevent those who went into the forest from disappearing, but did not want to be forgotten. The Curse of the Pharaohs. When Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, he had no idea that within months his team would find itself at the center of one of the most famous historical myths of the 20th century. The first to die was Lord Carnarvon, the sponsor of the expedition. He died suddenly, from blood poisoning caused by a mosquito bite. That same night, according to eyewitnesses, the electricity went out in Cairo. Carnarvon's dog, who was in England, allegedly began to howl and soon died. This was the beginning of what would later be called the Curse of the Pharaohs. At the time of the tomb's opening, at least 9 people who had a direct or indirect connection with the expedition had died. Some of them had died of illness, others of accidents, and still others of something inexplicable. The records show an abnormally high mortality rate among researchers and technical personnel. However, Carter lived to old age and died a natural death. He did not believe in the curse, but even he admitted there was something heavy, thick, oppressive in the atmosphere of the tomb. Inside the tomb were found texts that were later translated as warnings. One of them, engraved on a stone tablet, said, "Death on wings will overtake him who disturbs the king's peace." Coincidentally or not, it was the flying creatures that caused Carnarvon's illness. But the mystery is not limited to this case. Similar waves of death have been recorded in other excavations related to ancient Egypt. In the 1970s, a team of archaeologists exploring the Abydos area also encountered a chain of deaths. 5 died within 2 years. One of them was from a rare blood disease that could not be explained. All the cases were united by one thing: the work used artifacts previously extracted from tombs. Some researchers suggest that it is a biological threat: fungi, spores, mold. But none of the versions explain the selectivity of the action. Why do some die, while others who came into contact with the same objects remain alive? Why are the symptoms often different? Why are some artifacts still being taken, even after decades? There are other explanations. Some believe it is not a curse, but a structure. Tombs were not built simply for burial. They were designed as closed systems, to contain not only flesh, but also intent. Disrupting the structure starts a chain that cannot be stopped, because it is not magical. It is architectural. Whatever the reason for the deaths, the effect remains. Thousands of years later, millions know the name Tutankhamun, but fewer know the name Carnarvon. Is it a curse, or is it simply a reminder? In Egypt, nothing is ever yours alone. Even if you think you found a way in, you've only opened someone else's door, and it may have been closed for a reason. Flashmob, A858 on Reddit. In 2011, an account named A858 appeared on Reddit. It didn't comment, it didn't respond, it didn't engage in discussions. It just posted long strings of symbols, codes that made no sense to most users. The entries were released irregularly, without explanation. No one knew who was behind it, and everything would have remained in the shadows, if not for one fact. Inside these symbols, there really were messages hidden. Users began to decipher the strings. It turned out that some of them were converted English text, encrypted using a complex scheme using 64-bit systems. One of the first successful decipherments contained the phrase, "The fate of the world depends on this." Later fragments from the Old Testament, geographic coordinates, and even coded images. No connection was found between these fragments. They were just there, appearing and disappearing. But with each new publication, the feeling was the same. This is not a random game. This is a structure. The flash mob quickly turned into a cryptographic movement. Thousands of users tried to build a model that would explain the logic of the posts. Some suggested that it was an artificial intelligence project. Others talked about a government operation, hidden behind Reddit. The strangest theory, it's a way to transmit information, disguised as chaos, through an ordinary platform, among ordinary posts. But then, abruptly, everything stopped. A858's account suddenly went silent. The posts disappeared. The links led to nothing. Reddit's administration declined to comment on what was happening. Archived copies of most of the transcripts remained, but some were corrupted. Some claimed that the posts disappeared not only from the site, but from local copies as well, as if their very presence was disturbing something. Amidst this silence, another account appeared with a similar nickname, but its messages were meaningless. Blank lines, repeating characters. Researchers considered it an attempt at forgery, but the main thing was gone. A858 never returned, and neither did the explanation. Could it have been a test? Possibly. An experiment? Probably. But with each passing year, when no information emerges, the version is the same. It was a communication channel between someone who knew what they were doing and someone who should have understood. No one understood. Or understood, but didn't say. All that was left were zeros, ones, and silence. And one question that no one answered. If it was a joke, why haven't we forgotten it? Mysterious monument in Butter Creek. On a deserted piece of land in the state of Georgia, USA, near the town of Butter Creek, stood a granite monument that many called the American Stonehenge. Its official name is the Georgia Guidestones. Built in 1980. Author unknown. Initiator. A man under the pseudonym Robert K. Christian, acting on behalf of a small group of loyal Americans. From the very beginning, this object seemed more than just strange. It seemed programmed. The monument consisted of 5 massive slabs arranged in the shape of radial petals. On each side was a text engraved in 8 languages: English, Russian, Chinese, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, Spanish, and Swahili. The main message was 10 instructions to humanity. The first of them is, keep the world's population below 500 million in balance with nature. This raised questions. Why was the threshold set? Why was the wording so technical, almost devoid of emotion? And most importantly, why were the authors unknown even decades later? There were suggestions that this was a message for survivors of a global catastrophe, or a program for a new order, or a ritual warning encrypted as a guide. The monument was oriented astronomically precisely. In one of the slabs there is a hole through which on a certain day of the year a ray of sunlight illuminated the central axis. The installation was clearly thought out to the smallest detail, from the polishing of the granite to the astronomical alignment. There was no museum, no guard, no explanatory sign nearby, only slabs, only silence. Many considered the object cultist. They tried to blow it up, desecrate it, paint over it. In 2022, one of the slabs was indeed damaged by an explosion. A few days later, the remaining elements of the monument were completely dismantled. Officially, for security reasons. But this coincidence fit too neatly into the character of the entire structure. It appeared suddenly and disappeared without a trace, never becoming truly understandable. No organization has claimed responsibility for the demolition. All that remains is a concrete platform, and archival photos in which strange inscriptions speak not so much to contemporaries as to someone who will come later. Maybe we weren't supposed to read these lines. Maybe they were meant for those who would remain. But then, why did we see them? Why did we remember them? And who decided it was time to erase them? The scream of the devil in the mine. In the late 1980s, a group of Soviet geophysicists drilled a super-deep borehole in the Murmansk region, near the Kola Peninsula. The project was known as the Kola Super Deep, an ambitious attempt to reach the lowest layers of the Earth's crust. But in the Western press, the drilling became famous by another name, the Shaft to Hell. Officially, the drill reached a depth of more than 12 kilometers. But it was in one of the deepest sections that something happened that would later be called the Scream phenomenon. According to one version, after lowering a sound recording probe into the shaft, the device began transmitting a strange signal, not noise, not a hum, but something resembling human voices. The recording allegedly captured an unintelligible chorus of moans, screams, and cries. There was not one voice on the tape, but many. The sound was chaotic, as if coming from a vast underground space filled with torment. The story spread around the world, first aired on a Christian radio program in the United States. There, it was presented as confirmation of the existence of hell, using a supposedly leaked audio recording from the scene. In response, Soviet sources denied everything. Scientists explained no recording was made, no probe with a microphone was used, the whole thing was fiction. However, a number of former project employees later did not directly deny the rumors in informal interviews. They spoke evasively, and they added, some of the instruments did not behave as expected. Some scientists explained the scream as an acoustic interpretation of rock movement, specific frequencies that the human brain can mistakenly perceive as speech. Others claim the whole story is a hoax by a radio show. But the strange thing is how this legend lives on. The sound attributed to the mine has been copied many times, inserted into videos, discussed, and each time it evokes the same reaction, instinctive fear. Even if the audio recording was fake, even if nothing was recorded, why did this story stick? Why, among thousands of scientific discoveries, did people remember this particular fragment, not as a fact, but as a feeling? Perhaps it doesn't matter whether there was a scream. Perhaps what matters is what we heard in the silence when we looked too deep down. And the question isn't what the device transmitted. It's what we expected it to transmit. Psychological experiment Room 237. In 1997, an experiment was conducted at a closed research institute in Germany that has never been officially acknowledged, but that left behind too many coincidences to be a hoax. It was never named publicly, but documents leaked online in the early 2000s included a number, Room 237. Many believe it to be an allusion to the room in the film The Shining, but the connections turned out to be far less artistic. The essence of the experiment, according to unconfirmed data, was to create a completely isolated sensory chamber, devoid of sounds, light, smells, and time. Inside is a room 5x5 meters, white walls, temperature strictly plus 22 degrees C, ventilation without sound. Electromagnetic background is shielded, no clocks, no objects, only a person. A volunteer, a 36-year-old man with no psychiatric history, was asked to spend 30 hours there. There was hidden video surveillance inside the chamber. For the first 4 hours, the subject walked, tried to talk, and stretched out the time. Then he lay down. Then he stood up. At the 7th hour, he froze. According to the footage, he began to stare at a point on the wall. He never looked away. The video of this moment is strangely blurry, as if the image had begun to bleed. When I tried to digitize the film again, the effect was repeated. This never happened with any other camera. At the 12th hour, the subject began to talk, but not to the camera. He was talking to someone standing in front of him. The intonation was respectful. No answers were heard. He nodded several times, laughed once. But the laughter was very quiet, almost an exhalation. Then he fell silent. After the time was up, the volunteer refused to leave the room. He said, "I'm already here." Attempts to ask him failed. He withdrew. He was hospitalized. 3 days later, he disappeared from the clinic. Officially, discharged. Unofficially, gone. The experiment was never repeated. The recordings were deleted. The scientists associated with the project either left or changed their specialization. But the rumor remained, and it is not explained. Because if you say that room 237 is just an empty room, you ignore the main question. What if there really is someone there, but they only appear when you are alone, and you do not call, and you do not look, you just sit for a long time? Balloons from Costa Rica. In the south of Costa Rica, in the Diqui Valley, among tropical thickets and forgotten banana plantations, perfectly shaped stone spheres have been found for decades. They are called Diqui balls, but no one knows exactly where they came from, who made them, or why. Some are the size of a tennis ball, others weigh up to 15 tons. Almost all are geometrically precise spheres. They were first discovered by workers at the United Fruit Company in the 1930s. While clearing land, they came across smooth stone hemispheres sunken into the ground, some in groups. Some were arranged in straight lines. There were also those that formed perfect triangles and circles. When they tried to move one of them, a dull crack was heard underground. It was not touched. Scientists have determined that the balls are made of gabbro, a heavy igneous rock found in southwestern Costa Rica, but far from where they were found. The question immediately became obvious. How were they delivered? And most importantly, why? No writing, no images, no fragments of culture that could explain this phenomenon have been found in the valley. Some associate the balls with a pre-Hispanic civilization that disappeared without a trace. Others, with astronomical diagrams. There are theories that they are ritual anchors, ties to celestial events. In one of the laid-out triangles, if you draw lines between the vertices, they indicate the position of the sun on the day of the vernal equinox. But this is not confirmed. Some of the balls were moved or stolen. Today, they stand in museums, villas, at the gates of government buildings. The rest are lost in the ground. During one expedition in the 1970s, researchers noticed that some of the balls had fine grooves on them, as if metal threads had slid along them. But they found no traces of tools, and no experiment has been able to replicate the accuracy and scale without the help of modern equipment. Some people think that the balls are just decoration. Some think that they are a mark. Some think that they are a memory. But none of the versions answer the main thing, why they do not carry any message, as if they were not meant to be read, but to be, without explanation. Without function, without time, just lying there, and reminding that someone already knew what a perfect circle looked like, when the circle hadn't been invented yet. The disappearance of the Yaogang family. In August 2008, in the Chinese province of Yunnan, on the outskirts of the village of Yaogang, a family of 5 disappeared. A husband, a wife, 2 children, and a grandmother. No quarrels, no debts, no signs of violence. The house was locked from the inside. The dishes were on the table. The tea in the cups was still warm. The program on the TV continued, which had started 15 minutes earlier. But there was no one, neither in the house nor around it. The first to sound the alarm was a neighbor who didn't see the children at school in the morning. An hour later, the police were already at the door. All the things were in their places: passports, phones, keys, clothes. 2 cats were sleeping in the room. Neither was hungry. Neither was nervous. Only one oddity. On the carpet in the hallway, a wet imprint of a bare foot. One, without dirt, without a pair. The investigation began quickly. All the villagers were questioned. No one saw anything. There was no video surveillance. Telephone operators confirmed. Cellular activity was 0 at 3:24 at night. All devices seemed to turn off at once. No calls, no attempts to get online. It was as if life simply stopped. A survey of the area yielded nothing. No traces in the forest, no strange cars. The house stood on a hill with a view of the river. Only one strange detail was found near the water: a torn piece of paper wedged in the rocks. There was no text on it, only numbers. 10 characters. They could neither be deciphered nor compared to anything. The paper disappeared from the case 3 days later. A week later, there was one call. A child's voice, whispering, said, "We're almost back." Then silence. The signal was coming from a payphone that hadn't been serviced since 2006. Officially, the Yaogang family is listed as missing. No bodies, no trace. The house was sold. The new tenants tore down the walls but found a crack under the floor. A perfectly round depression, as if the ground had slightly caved in. There was no cave, no void underneath, just stone, smooth as if polished. The disappearance was attributed to unknown circumstances, but the village still avoids that area because sometimes, closer to the morning, a light comes on in the windows of the empty house. For a few seconds. No wiring, no electricity, just light that isn't connected to anything, and that comes back, as if someone is still looking for the way back. Time portal at O'Hare Airport. Chicago's O'Hare Airport is known as one of the busiest transportation hubs in the world. Millions of passengers, thousands of flights, 24-hour traffic. But amid all the noise, there's a report, nearly forgotten, of an event that still stirs controversy and questions that have no official answers. In the spring of 1994, an incident recorded as a temporary disappearance of an object occurred at the airport's Terminal G. At 3:42 a.m., security received a call from a technician working the night shift. Near one of the closed gates, he had discovered a person who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. According to him, the figure materialized right before his eyes. Without light, without sound, it simply became visible. The man looked disoriented, dressed in strange clothes. A 1950s suit, neatly ironed, a bow tie, a hat. He didn't speak. He just looked around. A minute later, he disappeared. This incident would have been attributed to fatigue, if not for the video. A surveillance camera installed above the G17 exit recorded the silhouette. The footage shows an empty area. Then there is distortion, as if the air is vibrating. And for a moment, a person appears. Blur, light distortion, and again emptiness. The recording was checked. No errors were found. After the internal report was published, the camera was replaced. The fragment of the recording disappeared from the archive 3 days later. When another employee tried to find a backup copy, the database returned an error. Synchronization failure. The only trace left was a technician's statement, handwritten, uncopied. The document is kept in a private collection and is said to contain details not found in the official report. A few months later, another incident occurred in the same terminal. A passenger reported that she saw a man standing as if captive inside the glass. She claimed that the figure did not move, but the face was alive, scared, as if he wanted to say something, but could not. The transparent surface did not reflect light. After a few seconds, everything disappeared. Researchers studying anomalous spaces later proposed a theory. Certain areas with intense electromagnetic voltage can cause a local distortion of time perception, and the airport, as a junction, can inadvertently become a transition point. This hypothesis borders on science fiction, but there are other coincidences. In 1978, A private jet pilot approaching O'Hare told the controller he saw other planes that looked old. He thought he was watching an air show, but at that moment, there was only him in the sky, and the radar was empty. It later turned out that the description of one of the planes matched a model that had been decommissioned 30 years earlier. There are few cases, but they repeat. The same terminal, the same time, between 3 and 4 in the morning. And always, a feeling that the space slightly does not coincide with itself. As if occasionally, at the right moment, the border between now and somewhere nearby opens for a few seconds. Not to let someone through, but simply because the loop has shifted. Maybe they're coincidences. Maybe they're false memories. But if you find yourself at O'Hare Airport in the middle of the night and suddenly feel the space around you shaking slightly, don't turn around right away. Because someone might already be standing behind you, and to them you're someone who just appeared out of nowhere. Underground cities of Cappadocia. In the heart of Turkey, in the Cappadocia region, beneath the rolling landscape of weathered rock, lies something far stranger than tourist postcards and colorful balloons. These are underground cities, dozens of levels dug into the soft, tough rock, connected by passages, tunnels, and ventilated shafts. The most famous of them, Derinkuyu, goes down to a depth of more than 60 meters, and includes living quarters, warehouses, wineries, chapels, ventilation systems, and wells. And all of this is underground, without traces of architects, without a clear reason, without an explanation of why they were built at all. Official archaeology claims that the cities were used in the Byzantine period to hide from raids. But the structure itself tells a different story. The defense mechanisms, stone doors weighing hundreds of kilograms, manually rotating, secret passages, blind branches leading to dead ends. All this does not look like a temporary shelter, but like a system created for long-term existence. And perhaps not from an external enemy, but from something that could not be let in, or, on the contrary, let out. There are no decorations inside the cities, no frescoes, no icons, almost no symbols, as if they were built not for beauty, but for survival. Some areas seem to be deliberately isolated. There is only one way to get there. Cut off, no ventilation, no meaning. Researchers suggest that these could have been isolation chambers. But who was put there, and why? The strangest thing is the dating. Archaeologists attribute the cities to the first millennium BC, but in older layers, traces of repeated use have been found more than once, as if someone had already lived in these places long before the Byzantines descended there. Some of the deepest passages are filled in unnaturally, as if they were closed from the inside. In one of the shafts, they found a ceiling made of smooth, dark stone, not found in the region. On it there is a notch similar to a handprint, not human in proportions, just a notch. No comment. Locals say they can still hear noises coming from some of the undiscovered tunnels, a hum or something like breathing. Researchers chalk it up to an acoustic effect, but no one goes down there alone, even today. Some theories link Cappadocia to ancient catastrophes, global events that forced civilizations underground. Others claim that these are ritual spaces that simulate death and rebirth. And then there are those who say people didn't build these for themselves. People found them and simply used them. In the 21st century, more than 90% of underground corridors remain undiscovered. Maps are incomplete. Some sections have collapsed, but the very idea that there is an entire city beneath our feet, built not according to the laws of time, but according to some other principles, does not give us peace. Because these cities aren't dead. They're just waiting to be remembered, or needed again. And then someone will come down, not out of curiosity, but because something will start happening on the surface that will force them to hide below again. Voices from Radio UVB 76. At 4,625 kilohertz, somewhere between the loud silence of the airwaves and the chaotic noise of the shortwave range, one of the most mysterious radio stations in history has been broadcasting for decades. UVB 76. They call it the buzzer. Since the 1970s, it has been broadcasting the same thing, a short metallic sound, a beep, repeated at intervals of several seconds. No pauses, no meaning, no explanation. Sometimes, very rarely, the signal is interrupted, and then a voice sounds. Male, clear, speaking Russian. He reads out groups of numbers, names, seemingly meaningless words. Then, more buzzing. These transmissions occur without warning, without decryption, and are not repeated. No one has officially acknowledged a connection to any intelligence agency or military structure, although almost everyone assumes that UVB 76 is part of the Emergency Backup Command System. But if that's true, Why has the station continued to operate for decades? Why does it remain active even when entire military communications units are switching to digital technology? Why does the hum not stop even at night, even during political crises, government changes, power outages? In 2010, amateur radio enthusiasts tracked the location of the broadcast for the first time. The source was located at an abandoned military base near the town of Poverovo in the Moscow region. A group of researchers went there. They found empty buildings, broken windows, broken equipment, and a radio station that continued to work. The same sound was coming from the loudspeaker. 2 days later, the signal disappeared from that point and returned from another, more powerful, more focused one, as if someone realized they had been found. Some days, the airwaves of buzzer are filled with oddities. One time, they recorded a piece of classical music. Another time, a female voice uttering incoherent phrases. There were moments when the sounds of footsteps, doors, and coughs were broadcast. It was as if the microphone had been left on, accidentally transmitting something that should not have been broadcast. Some consider UVB-76 to be an element of the dead hand, an automatic response system in case of a disaster. Others, an audio beacon confirming that the station is still alive. But there are also less rational versions. For example, that it is not a radio station at all, and a mechanism that holds attention, a way of presence, a reminder of something that has not yet arrived, but already marks its frequency in space. Because if one day that sound were to disappear, truly disappear, without warning, without replacement, many people around the world would know that something terrible had happened. Even if they didn't know what it was, they would simply feel the silence. And then the question would no longer be what we heard. It would be why we had been prepared for this for so long. The mystery of the city of Cahokia. On the territory of the modern state of Illinois, a few kilometers from the city of St. Louis, there is one of the most mysterious archaeological sites of North America, the ancient city of Cahokia. Today, in its place, there is grass, rare trees, and dozens of artificial earthen hills, at first glance resembling natural elevations. But each hill is man-made, and in the center rises the largest of them, Monk's Mound. Its height is about 30 meters. It was the center of the city in which, according to estimates, up to 40,000 people lived, more than in London in the 12th century. And yet we don't know who built it. What were the names of these people? What was their language? Why did they disappear? Cahokia was founded around 1050. Over the next 2 centuries, it developed at an incredible rate. Archaeologists find remains of streets, fortified walls, temples, and dwellings. The city's center was designed with mathematical precision, its orientation matching the solar cycles. It even had a calendar of sorts, made up of huge wooden pillars arranged in a circle that allowed the equinoxes and solstices to be tracked. And all this, without writing, without the wheel, without metal, without a known center of power, not a single inscription, not a single name. But the most disturbing discovery was not the structure of the city, but what lay beneath it. In several hills, archaeologists found burials with bodies laid out in complex patterns. One was of more than 200 young women. Another pit contained bodies without arms. There were also mass burials with the bones arranged in layers, as if the bodies had been dumped into the pits at intervals. Some believed these were ritual sacrifices. Others believed they were the remains of a catastrophe, but no one knows what exactly happened. Around 1350, the city began to empty. It didn't collapse. It didn't burn. It simply ceased to exist. The people left, and they didn't even leave behind legends. Native tribes living in the region today say Cahokia is not their creation. They call it the land of the other's ancestors. Native American cultures have an image of first people, those who came before them, who built, who knew, who left. Some researchers suggest that Cahokia could have been the center of a culture comparable in importance to the Mayan or Sumerian civilizations, only without writing, without stone, without a legacy. And then the main question is not why the city disappeared, but how could an entire civilization exist at such a level and be completely erased as if it had never existed, as if it did not fit into history, as if someone crossed it out, or it itself decided to leave. Hatton Garden is the perfect heist. In April 2015, London witnessed what is officially being called the robbery of the century. In the Hatton Garden area, home to some of Europe's most secure bank vaults for decades, a group of people broke into an underground vault and stole more than £200 million worth of jewelry, cash, and documents. But it's not the size of the theft that's at issue. There were many of those. It's the details that still don't add up to a logical picture. According to the official version, the criminals were 6 men aged between 50 and 70. Former robbers, former electricians, none of whom had access to modern technology. They entered the building through an elevator shaft, bypassed the security systems, disabled the alarm, and drilled through a wall into the vault that was over half a meter thick. The operation lasted 2 days. No one heard. Not a single sensor worked. The cameras recorded only external movements. Inside, there was silence. Later, one of the investigators said, "This could not have been done without help from the inside." But the help was never proven. Moreover, the equipment used by the criminals was old, cumbersome, and noisy. But there are no traces of its transportation to the building. Not on cameras, not in time, not in logistics. It's as if the equipment appeared on the spot and then disappeared. When the criminals were arrested, most of the stolen goods were missing. The money and jewelry were gone. Of the 32 boxes opened in the vault, most belonged to people whose names did not appear in any open financial system. Some boxes were empty. Some were storing documents that should not have existed. One investigator anonymously admitted that an uncensored diplomatic packet related to events in Iran in the 1980s was found in one of the cells. It disappeared before the official inventory. After the trial, almost all of the participants received short sentences. They were quickly transferred to safe prisons. 2 later died of natural causes. 1 disappeared before he could be interrogated. The one who remained is silent. And all the signs point to the fact that this wasn't a robbery for money. It was a cover-up operation. Take something that can't be searched for, and pretend it was just a robbery by pensioners on safes. And if that's true, then the whole perfect crime structure becomes something else. Not a story about criminals, but a story about how a system can hide its mistakes under the guise of chaos, where the most reliable safe is not concrete and an alarm system, but a story that the public readily believes, a story about robbers, drills, and millions, without mentioning what exactly disappeared forever. The case of the sewn-up dead man from Australia. On December 1st, 1948, a dead man was found on Somerton Beach in Adelaide. He was lying at the water's edge, neatly dressed in a suit with shiny shoes. There were no documents or money in his pocket. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of poisoning. His appearance did not match any of the records in the database. Thus began one of the strangest cases in Australian criminal history, the mystery of the sewn-up man, which would later be called the Tamam Shud case. Upon examination, it was discovered that the labels on the clothes had been cut off. Fingerprints were inconclusive. The autopsy revealed no cause of death, although the organs seemed to the doctors to be abnormally overloaded with blood. This hinted at poisons, but the tests found nothing. It was as if the man had died from lack of cause. A few days later, a tiny scrap of paper was found in his secret pocket. Printed on it was the words Tamam Shud. This is a Persian expression meaning end or completed. It was later discovered that it had been torn from the last page of a rare collection of Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat. When they started looking for the book from which the phrase was torn, a man came to the police and said he had found one in his car, parked near the beach. In the margins of the book were pencil marks, encrypted lines, including phone numbers and a series of letters that did not match any known code. One of the phones belonged to a nurse who lived nearby. She refused to talk. It later emerged that she did know the man, but did not officially acknowledge him. Her behavior during interrogation was described as borderline hysteria. The strangest thing happened later. In 2022, more than 70 years later, DNA analysis revealed the man's name to be Carl Webb. It would seem that the mystery was solved, but the more they learned about Carl, the stranger the story became. He disappeared from all records until the moment of his death. None of his relatives knew where he was, where he worked, why he was in Adelaide, and what codes were left in the book. Even after the identification, there was one detail that no one could explain. Why would someone have had to destroy his traces so thoroughly, without even leaving a tag on his clothes? If it was just death, why did it feel like an encrypted message? And most importantly, who was it intended for? Maybe Tamam Shud really does mean the end. But maybe in this case, the end was just the beginning of another story, one that no one wants to tell, and which 7 decades later remains as tightly sewn up as the vanished biography of one man on an Australian beach. The mystery of the Hong Kong boat Sampan. In December 1955, residents of one of Hong Kong's piers noticed a boat slowly drifting toward the shore, not responding to signals. The vessel was old, wooden, typical of local fishermen, a sampan. But inside, everything looked as it should not have looked on a living vessel. Not a single person. Not a sound. The sail was down, the oars were in the boat, the lights were out. However, the water in the bucket was fresh. The kettle was warm. And someone had recently eaten. When the local sailors boarded, they found no signs of panic or struggle. Clothes lay neatly folded on the deck. In the cabin were family photos, icons, personal belongings. Everything looked as if the people had just left. The only thing that disturbed the atmosphere of calm was dried blood on the railing, a thin line as if from a cut. Not a single trace of where the crew had gone. No bodies, no news. According to the documents, there were 3 fishermen, a father, a son, and a nephew. They had gone out to sea 2 days earlier. The forecast was normal, no waves were observed. Contact with them was lost 6 hours after they had set out. They did not return to the port. They began to search for them, but no boat found any traces, until the sampan approached the pier, on its own, as if from memory. The investigation revealed nothing. All the things were in place. The food supply was not exhausted. The compass was working. The engine was manually turned off. The radio was turned off. On the table was an open notebook. The last entry. We hear, but we do not see. No context, no explanation. Things got weirder when one of the inspectors inspecting the boat started complaining of headaches and auditory hallucinations. 3 days later, he was hospitalized with paranoia. He said that the boat remembers something. His colleagues chalked it up to fatigue. But a week later, another officer wrote a report claiming to have heard breathing in the boat when he was alone inside. They tried to dismantle the sampan, but something always got in the way. Either documents disappeared or equipment broke down. In the end, the boat was left in a warehouse under lock and key. It stood there until the 1970s, until it suddenly burned down in a fire at night. Not a single boat around was damaged. The cause of the fire was not found. It is rarely remembered now. Sometimes it is mentioned in records of marine anomalies as the boat that came alone, but for those who remember, there remains a feeling that the sampan did not simply return. She came back empty on purpose, as if something that was inside remained, but not outside, but inside her. And everything that left with the people remained in the boat not as a memory, but as a presence that did not want to be found, only heard, but too late. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson. In May 2008, a 19-year-old college student named Brandon Swanson was driving home to Marshall, Minnesota, after an end-of-semester party. He was sober, driving carefully, and called his parents around midnight to say he was stuck on the side of the road. He said he had pulled into a ditch and couldn't get out. The phone connection was clear. He explained where he was and asked to be picked up. But when his father arrived, Brandon was gone. And so began one of the strangest disappearance stories in modern America. The parents continued to talk to their son on the phone. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. The entire time, Brandon said he was walking along the road toward the lights of the city. He didn't sound scared. He didn't panic. He knew where he was going. And then, suddenly, he went silent. His last words were, "Oh, shit." And then silence. The signal was cut off. The phone no longer answered. It didn't go dead. It was just never picked up again. They tried to track his location using cell towers. It turned out he wasn't where he thought he was. The police started searching a day later. Brandon's car was found on a country road 30 kilometers from the reported location. Everything inside was in place. No signs of a struggle. No signs of damage. They searched fields, forests, drainage canals. They raised helicopters, used dogs. The trail led to one cornfield and disappeared. No traces of blood, clothes, nothing. It was as if the man had simply vanished into thin air. Later, experts noted something odd. Brandon knew the area well. He couldn't have made such a big mistake, and even if he had taken a wrong turn, why didn't a single camera, a single eyewitness, or a single piece of clothing provide a clue? Some suggested that he fell into a body of water, but searches with drones, echo sounders, and divers yielded no results. There was little water in that area, and the body could not have been missed. And the phone continued to signal for several hours, as if it was on the surface. Years later, his family pushed for the passage of Brandon's Law, requiring police to respond immediately to reports of missing adults, instead of waiting 24 hours. But Brandon himself was never found, not alive, not dead. His case was more than just a missing persons case. It was a story that lacked explanation. No motive, no conflict, no direction. Just a voice walking in the darkness, with a sure knowledge of the way and a sudden silence when he might have actually seen something. Some say he simply went the wrong way that night. But no one is specifying what exactly the wrong way means. If the tracks end in a dry field under a clear sky. And if the man did not fall, did not run, was not kidnapped, but simply disappeared between two words. Signal O from Mars. In 1995, a team of astronomers from the European Southern Observatory in Chile were conducting routine observations of radio noise coming from the planets of the solar system. Among other things, they were tuning the equipment to Mars, studying the reflected signals from the planet's ionosphere. Everything went according to protocol, until within 5 seconds, the instruments recorded a narrow-band pulse that had no analogs in any observation archive. The signal was in a clear frequency range that did not correspond to natural phenomena. It was too smooth, too focused. In its characteristics, it resembled an artificial source. It was called simply O, from the English oddity, that is, strangeness. It appeared once in a fixed place and never repeated. Astronomers did not immediately attach any significance to this, but later, upon reanalysis, it turned out that at the moment of signal reception, the antenna was pointed at the Schiaparelli crater, one of the oldest and most studied structures on the surface of Mars. A coincidence, perhaps, but too precise to simply brush it aside. When trying to listen to the same section again, no activity was recorded. But strange things appeared. Modulations resembling a binary code were found in the magnetic recording of the signal. They failed to decipher them. Formally, there was too little data, but attempts continued. One of the physicists who worked with the original recording later wrote in his personal notes, "This is not a message, it's a marker, as if someone checked whether we were listening." The publication of the results was delayed. The article appeared only 4 years later, and only in a specialized journal. There was no press release, no interviews were given. The data was posted in an archive, but the original raw file disappeared after a few weeks. The reason was a technical update. NASA knows about the O signal, unofficially. Some engineers working with Martian satellites claim that similar impulses have appeared again, but at different frequencies. And each time, once, without repetitions, as if something on the planet, covered in dust and silence, moves from time to time. There is a version that it was a reflection of a terrestrial signal accidentally reflected from the ionosphere of Mars. But calculations do not confirm such an effect. The angle, intensity, and structure of the pulse do not correspond to a possible re-reflected wave. It came from there, not from us. Today, the O signal is not remembered. It did not become part of the official history of observations, but it remained in conversations among those who work with telemetry. Because no one knows what's worse. If it was just a system glitch, or if it was something that actually came from Mars, once, exactly, and never happened again. Like someone marked a period, and never responded again. The phenomenon of children with black eyes. Since the mid-1990s, similar messages have been appearing in English-speaking countries, letters, blog posts, and then videos, in which people described encounters with children with completely black eyes. Not in the sense of the color of the iris, completely black, from eyelid to eyelid, without whites, without glare, as if covered in an inky film. These children always appeared in pairs. They approached houses, cars, stood at doors, and asked to be let in. They did not scream. They did not show aggression. They just looked persistently. The first cases were reported in Texas, then in the UK, Canada, Australia. All the stories had one thing in common, a strange sense of something wrong in their presence. People said they were overcome with panic fear, not because of appearance, but because of the feeling that an alien construct had appeared in reality that made no sense. As if the children knew more than they should, as if they were not children at all. They asked for the phone, to ask to come into the house, to ask how to get there. They spoke politely, but in a rhythm devoid of real intonation, as if they were acting out a scenario. When they were refused, they did not get angry. They simply left. And there was a feeling that something was not finished, as if you opened the door, but did not let someone in. Some cases involved electronic malfunctions. One man claimed that a light bulb in the hallway blew out when the children approached the door. Another claimed that a tape recorder started playing backwards. Others let them in. One Oregon man said he let 2 such children into his house and got a severe migraine and a bloody nose. The children left within 10 minutes. His dog died the next morning. Doctors found nothing, just functional failures without cause. Scientists explain the phenomenon as a hallucination, viral psychology, collective mythologization. It is possible. But something else is strange. No one recorded these children on camera in real time. All recordings are either lost or distorted. Faces become blurry. Sound is distorted, as if they are present only in the moment but not saved. In some religious circles, children with black eyes are associated with the concept of a cross spirit, an entity that appears in a form closest to trust. And the most reliable way to enter the world is considered to be asking to enter. If that's true, then they never come without a reason. Then they're a test. And if you let them in, something shifts. Not right away, not loudly. It's just that the route of something that was supposed to pass by changes. And the most terrible question here is not, who are they? But what will happen the first time someone lets you in and doesn't tell anyone about it? Because he won't be able to, or because it won't be him anymore. The explosion in the metropolis that no one is talking about. On the night of August 3rd, 1973, a powerful explosion occurred in the industrial area of Metropolis, Illinois. It was heard almost 20 kilometers away. Windows in houses shook. Alarms went off even in residential areas. Eyewitnesses saw a flash, bright blue-white, tearing the sky for a split second. But after a few minutes, silence. No sirens, no firefighters, no news. Official sources have not registered anything, neither an emergency nor a man-made accident. The police gave a short comment. There was minor smoke on the territory of the plant. The situation is under control. But photographs taken by eyewitnesses showed something different. The entire hangar, where the experimental research laboratory was located, was completely destroyed. The foundation was charred. The metal was melted. Everything around was a crater, and not a single body. The employees listed in this building have disappeared from the registers. Their biographies have become untraceable. Some have been transferred. Others quit for family reasons. All attempts at contact have been fruitless. Their homes have been sold. Their medical records have been sealed. Their relatives are silent. A month later, local residents began to notice strange things. Antennas began to be installed in the abandoned area, then a dome, similar to a temporary storage facility. People in uniform without insignia appeared around. One of them, according to a passerby, answered the question, "What was here?" with the answer, "Nothing that you would like to remember." Internal documents obtained through an anonymous source claim that the lab was conducting work on so-called temporal stress of materials, experiments on the stability of matter under abnormal electromagnetic pressure. In simple terms, it could have been an attempt to create a localized time distortion. The legend sounds like science fiction, but the details match some descriptions of the effect in other declassified Cold War projects. According to this data, there was no fire at the moment of the explosion. There was a shift. The space in which part of the building was located began to turn inside out, not by an explosion, but as if from the inside. Everything inside disappeared, didn't burn, didn't evaporate, became inaccessible. Later, a dome with a radio-absorbing coating was installed on the site. Sensors around the perimeter recorded a weak background, not radiation, not heat, not sound, something else. In the reports, it was listed as unrecordable density. Metropolis is a city where today there is no mention of it, no plaque, no anniversary, just a blank spot on the map, and the rare conversations of those who remember that night. They do not talk about the explosion, but about the silence after it, about how sounds disappeared for a moment, as if it was not the air that was ringing, but time itself. And if they really were trying to break the boundary between the present and something else in that building, maybe they succeeded. What they didn't know was that there was someone on the other side watching, or waiting, and now they were just watching, until someone turned the equipment back on. Black Dolphin is a mysterious prison. In southwestern Russia, not far from the border with Kazakhstan, there is a gray concrete building with no windows, no signs, no traffic. It is hard to find on a map, but among a small circle of people, this place is known as the Black Dolphin. Officially, it is a special regime penal colony for life sentence prisoners. Unofficially, it is one of the most closed and sinister prisons in the world, about which much less is still known than about other facilities of similar scale, and not because there is nothing to tell, but because, perhaps, it is not worth telling. The prison got its name from a strange sculpture at the main gate, a black figure of a dolphin bowing its head as if in a gesture of surrender. No one knows why it was there or who created it. The sculpture stands covered in rust on a concrete platform in the middle of nowhere. No information, no tour photos, no official brochures. Only reports on the treatment of those convicted of particularly serious crimes, and a strange reputation that goes beyond the brutal regime. Inside, everything is organized in such a way as to deprive the prisoner not only of freedom, but also of the sense of time. Each cell has constant lighting, without a change of day and night. The windows, if there are any, are covered with concrete canopies that do not let in sunlight. The prisoners do not know whether it is morning or evening outside. They do not see the stars, rain, do not feel the change of seasons. Everything is static, eternal gray, eternal ceiling. The system of movement between zones is built on the principle of complete control. When a prisoner is taken out, he bends at the waist, hands behind his back, head down. He has no right to look at the employees. He doesn't see the routes he's being led along. That is, he can't remember where he is. Even if he wanted to run, he has nowhere to go. He doesn't know where he is at all. But the essence of the Black Dolphin is not only in the severity, it is in the fact that some prisoners disappear from all registers. They do not die. They are not released. They simply disappear. Their numbers are no longer listed in the database. Their files become inaccessible. The employees answer the same thing, transfer, but where, no one says. There are rumors that deep inside the prison there are areas that even regular guards don't have access to. Old Soviet concrete shafts leading underground. Cells without ventilation. Rooms with no lighting and no security cameras. One former employee, speaking anonymously, said there were sections that did not house criminals, but figures not designated as human beings. He declined to explain. There are also unofficial records of prisoners who began speaking languages they had never known, or writing in symbols reminiscent of Sumerian or Pre-Phoenician. Medical commissions recognize this as a sudden phase of psychosis, but why these psychoses recurred only in one wing and only in those who were transferred there after a status review, no one explained. Some researchers who study prisons as psychoarchitectural structures argue that the Black Dolphin is built not only as a place of detention, but also as a system of present suppression. It's as if an environment has been created in it where consciousness ceases to be oriented, where time loses its sequence, where you are not simply imprisoned, you are erased as an observer. It sounds like a metaphor, until you start comparing the geographic location of the site, the materials the internal partitions are made of, the lack of electronic documentation in certain areas, and especially the lack of satellite images of the roof. Even in the 21st century, images of this area are distorted and blurry. It is as if even a satellite cannot focus on this point. Among the conspiracy theories is the theory that the Black Dolphin does not contain criminals, but rather those who have become carriers of information that cannot be disseminated. Not necessarily spies, but perhaps those who manage to see something that doesn't fit into the world. And now they can't be let go, but they can't be killed either, only isolated, in a space that doesn't even register their existence. Maybe that's why the prison is there for a reason. Maybe it doesn't guard, it holds back, not the prisoners, but the information they carry within them. And the Black Dolphin at the entrance is not a symbol. It's a reminder that even from the depths, something can return, and it would be better for it not to know where the exit is. The city that disappeared, Angekoni, Greenland. In the icy expanses of northeastern Greenland, in a place where even today human footsteps are rare, there was a settlement called Angekoni in the early 20th century. It was not a large settlement, just a few dozen inhabitants, hunters, missionaries, a couple of European explorers. It was unknown, no industry, no trade routes. But that is precisely why its disappearance was so frightening, because it happened quietly, without explanation and without a trace. Angekoni first came to light in 1907, when a team of scientists sent by the Danish Geographical Society attempted to map the region. They found that the spot marked as a permanent settlement was completely empty. No smoke, no movement, no tracks. Just the remains of buildings, the frames of houses, abandoned tools, torn sleds. It was as if people had up and left, overnight. The provisions were still there. The lamps were lit. The beds were made. There were cups on the table, and in the corner of one of the huts, a child's toy half buried in the ashes. It was as if someone had simply vanished between two breaths. No animals, no bodies, no graves. The official explanation was reserved: climatic difficulties, hunger, migration. But residents of a neighboring village, located 100 kilometers away, claimed that several days before the expedition, they had seen a strange glow over the horizon. It lasted for more than 20 minutes, was silent but too regular in shape, like a dome. After that, the sky became too dark, as if night had come at the wrong time. The topography of Angiconi itself has changed. Maps made at the beginning of the century showed a lake 2 kilometers from the village. Today, it is gone. It has disappeared. The soil beneath the village is unstable. Magnetic deviations within a radius of 3 kilometers exceed the average by 10 times. Compasses refuse to show direction. GPS works with a delay. In 1962, a group of military geologists tried to use the area to set up a weather station. A week later, the project was shelved, not because of the weather, but because 3 engineers refused to continue working, saying that they hear footsteps in the snow behind the tent at night, although there is no one nearby. The sounds did not recur, but the anxiety remained. This was not mentioned in the reports, only a laconic, unfavorable conditions. Later, one of the geophysicists involved in that project admitted that he had found a cutout on a wooden beam in an old hut that had survived on the site of the village. It was a word in a language that did not match either Greenlandic or Eskimo. He sent a photo to the museum, but received no response. A month later, the photo had been erased from the film. Literally, the film was empty, as if the image could not be preserved. Some people think that Angiconi never existed, that it's a mistake on the map, but there are too many coincidences, too many people who were there, saw it, and never returned. All that's left are the coordinates, and a strange radio-silent zone where even military communications don't work. If the city disappeared, it disappeared not in space, but in the structure of memory itself, as if the place decided that some traces should not be left. Not for history, not for researchers, not for maps. And if one day someone appears there again, they will see not ruins, but nothing, because sometimes nothing is too much and too precise to be an accident. The disappearance of the Sodder children. Christmas night, 1945, in the American town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, was supposed to be ordinary. Everything was going according to plan in the Sodder family home. Garlands, a fireplace, the children were almost asleep. George and Jenny Sodder had 10 children in total. 5 of them went to their rooms on the 2nd floor. The rest slept downstairs. At 0:30, the fire broke out. The house caught fire unexpectedly and quickly, as if it was not the wood that was burning, but the space itself. George and Jenny managed to get out with some of the children, but 5 remained upstairs. The firemen didn't arrive until 8 in the morning. The house had burned to the ground. Nothing was found of the children. No bodies, no bones, not even charred things. It was as if they had never been there. At first, everyone decided that the children had died in the fire, but then something began that still has no logical explanation. Fire experts said that at such a temperature and such a time of burning, the bodies, bones, teeth should have been preserved at least partially. But there was nothing. The house burned quickly, but not so quickly that it turned into ashes completely. The concrete basement remained untouched. Ash is too light. Even animals were found after fires. But here, not a fragment. In addition, immediately after the fire, strange calls and messages began coming in. One woman claimed to have seen 5 children in a car driving through town the day before. Another claimed to have seen them at a motel breakfast in another state. These accounts were treated with skepticism, until a photo mailed to Jenny in 1967 turned up. On the back was written, "Boy, Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Lil boys, a 90,132 or 35. The face in the photo did indeed resemble one of the sons who disappeared in the fire, but no confirmation was ever received. The Sodder family never believed their children were dead until the end of their lives. They put up a billboard by the road with photos of the 5 and the question, "Where are they?" The sign stood for more than 30 years. It became a symbol that not all tragedies end with remains. Some end with disappearances without cause, and an attempt to believe that this one had a different ending. Among the alternative versions, kidnapping, threat, intervention by those who wanted to silence George. He openly criticized Mussolini's regime and received threats. Some believe that the fire was a cover, that the children were taken away, that the whole operation was planned in advance. But why? Why? And most importantly, where did the memory of them go? The house was torn down. The remains were never found. The official version remains. The children died. Unofficially, it is a case in which the fire burned not the bodies, but the evidence, and only a photograph remains. and a note sent decades later. I am Louis. If it was a lie, it had lasted too long. If it was true, then somewhere, in some house, there were children who knew who they were, but couldn't say it. And they didn't come back, because they didn't know how, or they weren't allowed to, or they became someone else. A resident of Taurad is a man without a country. In the summer of 1954, a middle-aged man arrived at Tokyo's Haneda International Airport, dressed elegantly, spoke French, Japanese, and several other languages, passed through passport control, showing documents and a visa. Everything seemed fine until the officials noticed the strange name of the country on the passport. It read, Taurad. Such a country did not exist. The border guards thought it was a mistake, but the man insisted, Taurad is a European country between France and Spain. He showed a map. It did indeed show a region, but it did not coincide with the real geographical borders. He claimed that it was an ordinary state that had existed for 1,000 years. He was in Japan on business, his third visit to the country. He showed a driver's license, commercial papers, even currency that looked like French francs, all counterfeit and all without any obvious signs of tampering. The man was taken to an interrogation room. Consulate representatives were called. No one could explain where he was from. His language existed. His accent was recognizable. But there were no documents confirming his identity in any database. His company, which he named, was also not found. The phone number he used to try to contact business partners did not exist. He was put up in a hotel under guard in case he was delirious or playing out an elaborate scam. 2 officers were on duty 24 hours a day. The room was on the top floor. The windows did not open. The door did not lock from the inside. In the morning, he was gone. There was no trace of escape inside. No fingerprints, no belongings, no clothes, just an empty bed. It was as if the man had simply ceased to exist. All attempts to find him in Japan and later around the world had been unsuccessful. He had not crossed a border. He had not left the country. He had disappeared from the map, just like his country. Some believe it was a mistake, or a joke, or a carefully planned provocation, but the documentation has been preserved. There are official records, officers' testimonies, protocols, and they all have one thing in common. The man believed that Taurad existed. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't playing. He knew the laws, the history, the culture. Among the strangest theories is the reality shift hypothesis, that a man came from a parallel world, similar to ours, but with different borders, with a different past, with different maps, and accidentally ended up here, in this one, where his country never existed, where his documents are fake, where his history is a mistake. Because if you imagine that there are worlds almost identical to ours, but with different countries, different roads, different solutions, then one mistake in the route can lead to a foreign airport, and you will realize it too late. And if the man from Taurad really came from there, where did he return? Or did he return alone? Cryptocurrency and the death of Gerald Cotton. In December 2018, the crypto world was rocked by the news. Gerald Cotton, the 30-year-old CEO of Canada's largest crypto exchange Quadriga CX, died suddenly in India. The official cause was complications from Crohn's disease. The funeral was held quickly. But within weeks, it emerged that Cotton was the only person with access to the keys to the exchange's cold wallets, which held more than $200 million in digital assets. The money was gone. It was impossible to withdraw, and it was impossible to recover. The company announced technical glitches, then an unforeseen loss of access. Customers began to panic. Investigations began, but the deeper they dug, the more it looked less like a tragedy and more like a carefully planned operation. Cotton had changed his will shortly before his death, making his wife his sole heir, just 2 weeks before his trip to India. He had also opened several offshore accounts, transferred assets, and suddenly outsourced some of the company's operations. Legally, it was all clean, but it looked like he was preparing to disappear. In addition, the hospital in India where he died had a controversial reputation. The death was recorded by a doctor whose name could not be verified in the medical registry. The body was cremated quickly, despite the fact that this was contrary to the rituals of his religion. The death certificate was misspelled. The signature was different from other documents. The investigation revealed that Quadriga CX had been operating without adequate reserves for months. Some transactions had been routed through Cotton's personal accounts. Some had simply disappeared. His business partners said they had no access to the system. One even admitted, "I didn't know where the money was." Theories have emerged. The most popular: Cotton faked his death, withdrew his assets, and disappeared. in a world where cryptocurrency allows you to disappear without a trace. He may have been supported by larger players interested in keeping quiet. Some even claimed that he started a new life under a different name, in Eastern Europe or Asia. There is no confirmation, but no refutation either. There's another theory. Cotton really did die, but not on his own. That he was eliminated because he knew too much, because he controlled more than he should have, because access to millions in unprotected form is more dangerous than it seems. The body was never exhumed. Requests for a second examination were denied. The Canadian police closed the case without conclusions. Officially, death. Unofficially, billions missing. And the feeling that digital anonymity was more real than even its creators expected. Maybe Cotton didn't leave because he was sick, but because he found a way to rewrite his presence in the system. Not delete it, not change it, but reset it, and become someone who can no longer be found. Not in the blockchain, not in the passport, not in the world where identity is tied to a name, because he took the name with him and left only an empty cell. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. On July 30th, 1975, at about 2:45 p.m., Jimmy Hoffa, former head of the powerful Teamsters Union, walked out of the Machu's Red Fox restaurant in suburban Detroit. He had arranged a meeting with two well-known mobsters, Anthony Giacalone and Anthony Provenzano. It was supposed to be an attempt to regain control of the union. He never showed up again. Hoffa was a legend. Under his leadership, the Teamsters became one of the most powerful organizations in America. He controlled billions of dollars in pension funds that were used not only to benefit workers, but also to finance projects connected to the mafia, construction, and politics. He knew too much, and he kept quiet for too long. When he disappeared, a massive operation began. The police, the FBI, private investigators, no one could understand how a man of his caliber could simply disappear. His car was found in a restaurant parking lot. Nothing inside, no signs of a struggle, no evidence. No witnesses who saw him leave the place. It was as if he had walked into someone else's car and disappeared. The first thing that surprised investigators was the inconsistency of the witnesses. Some said they saw Hoff with the shadow of a bodyguard. Others said he was standing alone. The surveillance cameras, if there were any, either didn't work or the footage had disappeared. The only real clue was a call he made a few minutes before he disappeared, telling his family that the people he was talking to hadn't shown up and he was leaving. But he didn't leave. The FBI has put forward dozens of theories. Kidnapping, murder, cremation, burial under a stadium, dissolution in acid. None have been confirmed. Many theorists believe he was eliminated on orders from the mafia, afraid that Hoffa would reveal details of illegal financing. Others believe he was eliminated on orders from Washington, fearing that he would regain power and seek revenge. But there are details that don't fit the pattern, like the fact that Hoffa's phone remained online for 12 hours after he disappeared, or that one of the agents working the case received an anonymous envelope containing a map with a warehouse in New Jersey circled on it. When they got there, the building was empty, but in the center was one thing: a cigar box containing an old Teamsters Union pin engraved with the initials JH. No fingerprints, no explanation. There is a theory that Hoffa was taken out of the U.S., that he was given a second life to keep quiet, forever, or that he was alive years later, kept in isolation as a carrier of too sensitive information. Considering how many figures had reasons to eliminate him at the same time, it is quite possible. But why, after decades, with all the technology, with all the interrogations, with dozens of confessions, has not a single body fragment been found, not a single confirmed version? Maybe because Hoffa has become more than a man. He has become a void in history, an inkhole into which it is convenient to write off everything that cannot be explained. And maybe they didn't really look for him, because if they found him, they would have to explain who exactly helped him disappear, and why, even after half a century, no one wants this question answered. The legend of the Black Knight, the satellite that was never launched. High above the Earth, in orbit around dozens of artificial satellites, something dubbed the Black Knight has been regularly spotted since the 1960s. Its shape is asymmetrical, angular, like a dark fold of metal or a curved piece of fabric. It is not listed in any international register of space objects. Its trajectory is unstable. It belongs to no one. And what is most strange, it was first discussed in the 1950s, long before such objects even appeared. In 1954, 3 years before the launch of Sputnik 1, the American press publishes reports that the U.S. Air Force is tracking an unidentified object in near-Earth orbit. This is impossible. Humanity had not yet launched technology into space. But the reports are repeated. Then they disappear. In 1960, the U.S. Air Force officially confirmed that they had detected a dark object in a polar orbit. This is different from typical satellites, which are launched at equatorial speeds. Polar orbit requires completely different resources. But at that time, neither the US nor the USSR had the technology to keep an object on such a trajectory. Photos of the object first become publicly available in 1998. Astronauts from the shuttle Endeavour photograph something strange drifting near them. The object does not look like a satellite. Too uneven, too asymmetrical. NASA later calls it a fragment of thermal protection. But space experts say the shape, shadow, and dynamics are not consistent with debris. The object behaves as if it were under control, although it has no energy sources. There are even stranger details. In 1973, Scottish astronomer Duncan Lunan claimed to have deciphered radio signals reflected from the object, allegedly received in the 1920s by Norwegian researchers. According to him, the signals contain a message: the coordinates of the star Epsilon Bautis and the phrase, "We have been observing you for 13,000 years." It sounds like a myth, but Lunan publishes calculations, graphs, comparisons. He is discredited, but he still does not abandon his theory. If we believe in the ancient origin of the object, a disturbing question arises. Who left it in orbit long before the emergence of human civilizations, and why? And if it is a product of earthly engineering, why does no one admit it? Why does it move from orbit to orbit without any propulsion systems? Why does it disappear from radars after a few days every time it is detected? The Black Knight doesn't transmit, it doesn't respond, it just is. Sometimes it appears on the horizon. Sometimes it drifts among the satellites. It doesn't break the rules, but it reminds us that we are not the first. Or perhaps not alone. And if it is an observation, it is too quiet not to be intentional, and too long not to be planned. The Nazca Plateau and its giant drawings. In the south of Peru, among the rocky wastelands, lies one of the most mysterious places on the planet, the Nazca Plateau. From a bird's eye view, it seems like an ordinary landscape, scorched by the sun and wind. But if you go higher, the picture changes. On the surface of the desert, hundreds of perfectly drawn lines, geometric shapes, spirals, and animal figures are spread out. Birds, monkeys, spiders, lizards. Some of them reach sizes of more than 200 meters. These drawings, the Nazca geoglyphs, are not visible from the ground. They can only be fully recognized from the air. And for more than 80 years, scientists, historians, and archaeologists have been unable to explain exactly how they were created, why they were created, and who exactly left them. The first thing that strikes you about Nazca is its scale. Thousands of lines cut across the surface of the Earth for tens of kilometers. They are perfectly straight. Sometimes they intersect at an angle that coincides with the solstice points. Some geoglyphs are figures of animals that have never been in the region. For example, a monkey with 9 fingers, or a spider identical to a rare species found in the jungles of Brazil, thousands of kilometers from Nazca. Geoglyphs are made by removing the upper dark layer of gravel, under which lies a light, almost white soil. It seems simple, but only if you forget that the figures had to be drawn in perfectly correct proportions, without seeing them in their entirety. At the time of their creation, people did not have aircraft. There were no accurate maps. There were no tools capable of creating such things by eye. There are versions that the lines were used as an astronomical calendar. Some of them do indeed coincide with the position of the sun on key dates of the year, but most do not. Other hypotheses suggest that these were roads for ritual processions, but many of the lines lead nowhere, end abruptly, or bend at strange angles that are not inherent in engineering logic. Some researchers suggest that the lines and figures were created as an upward appeal, as if those who drew knew that someone was looking down from the sky, or the act of drawing itself was not for observation, but for marking places of power, areas where anomalies occurred. This is confirmed by the fact that underground water channels were discovered under some of the geoglyphs, matching the shape of the drawings. In 2018, new figures were discovered that were previously impossible to notice, so worn down by time. They were only discovered with the help of drones. Among them were humanoid shapes with elongated heads, spiral-like symbols, and sets of parallel lines that, when superimposed on a digital map, indicated the locations of other geoglyphs. It was as if the lines themselves were a code, a coordinate grid, or a program. Skeptics claim that all this is a figment of the imagination, but they do not explain the main thing. Why have the figures not been destroyed over hundreds of years? Why hasn't the wind, which carries away layers of soil, erased these lines? It was as if the plateau had been chosen not only as a platform, but as part of a mechanism, as if they were not simply drawing here, but interacting with something that cannot be named. Today, Nazca is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but even on satellite images, its structure looks like something technical, not cultural, like a trace, like a message that doesn't need words, only shape and height. And the question is, if these figures are not drawn for us, then who should see them? And has anyone seen them yet? The mystery of the mannequin Piz in Japan. On one of the platforms of a Tokyo subway station on the Yamanote line, among the flow of passengers, advertising screens and the sounds of the carriages, stands a seemingly insignificant statue. It is a figure of a naked boy with an expression of complete calm on his face, performing a completely physiological act. He is urinating. There are such statues all over the world. The most famous one is in Brussels. But the Japanese version has one peculiarity. No one knows exactly where it came from and why. The official version is that the statue was installed in 1952 on the initiative of the station employees. Allegedly, it was an attempt to add humor to the monotonous atmosphere of the metro. But for decades, no one has presented the original documents or the name of the author. Moreover, the figure itself changed several times, sometimes unnoticeably. The size, facial expression, even the position of the hands were slightly different. When asked about this, the station staff shrugged their shoulders. It was always like this. The statue has become an object of cultural attention. It is regularly dressed in costumes that correspond with the seasons or holidays. A New Year's kimono, a school uniform, a sumo wrestler's costume. The clothes appear without warning, sometimes at night, sometimes at lunchtime. No one sees who is doing it. And it would all look like an urban game, if not for the oddities. In 1998, a surveillance camera captured footage of the statue changing position, very slightly. But the difference is visible. In one frame, the right leg is closer to the edge. In the next, it's the left. The interval between the recordings was 27 seconds. The video was checked for editing. No failure was confirmed. The camera was in good working order. The recording was sent to the archive, but a year later it was deleted, officially, according to storage rotation. One of the station employees claimed to have noticed one morning that the statue was wet, although it had not rained and the automatic system had not watered the platform. Another claimed that on New Year's Eve, the statue had turned a few degrees toward the train. It is not known who else saw it. But since then, the platform has become a place where not only passengers come, but also those looking for signs. Some believe the statue is a transitional object, not just a sculpture, but an anchor, or even a sensor, tracking something that has nothing to do with physiology, but with the direction of attention. It does not observe. It records, and it reacts. In one Japanese blog from 2006, a user named Overseer wrote, "When the boy stops peeing, the train will go the wrong way." The post was deleted an hour later, but the screenshot remains. And if this figure is more than a joke, then a strange question arises. Why does no one touch it officially? Why does the mayor's office not give explanations, not included in the list of city art objects? Why is it there but not recognized? Maybe because in a city where everything is controlled, some elements are left on purpose. As a reminder that not everything belongs to explanation, and that even in a crowd, even in the subway, there are things that should not be there. But they are there anyway, and they continue to look, even if they look like a joke. Claps from the depths. Bloop sound. In 1997, a U.S. Navy network of underwater microphones, designed to monitor Soviet submarines during the Cold War, picked up what would become one of the most talked about acoustic mysteries in the history of oceanography. The signal was given the code name Bloop. It was initially kept under wraps. But when scientists from NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, analyzed the footage, things only got stranger. The signal came from the South Pacific Ocean, near the coordinates of 50 degrees south latitude and 100 degrees west longitude, a huge stretch of water far from any major ports, underwater volcanoes, or continental shelves. It was extremely loud. The recording was picked up by several autonomous sensors located more than 3,000 kilometers apart. This meant that the source of the sound was not just powerful, it was gigantic. But the main thing is the nature of the signal. It resembled a living sound, a rapid increase, a frequency bend, as if something living had emitted a sharp, short call. However, according to calculations, for such a sound to come from a living organism, it must be tens of times larger than a blue whale. the largest creature that has ever lived on Earth. That is, either it is something unknown or not alive at all. NOAA made the signal publicly available. Millions listened to it. Biologists, geophysicists, and acousticians analyzed it. Dozens of versions emerged. Some claimed that it was the sound of an underwater ice shift. Others said that it was the noise of an underwater volcano. But no hypothesis matched the timbre, frequency, and amplitude of the signal. And no seismic device at that moment recorded the movement of the lithosphere at the supposed point. Later, in an interview, one of the NOAA employees admitted, "We don't know what it was. We only know that it didn't happen again, in the same form, although not exactly." He hinted that similar but weaker signals were recorded in 2001 and 2004. Only they were not named. They were not commented on. There is another coincidence connected with the coordinates of the signal source. Not far from the same point, the writer Howard Lovecraft placed in his stories the fictional underwater city of Urlia, where the ancient space god Cthulhu sleeps. This coincidence has no scientific significance, but it has become part of the legend, because in the ocean where 80% of the depths are unexplored even by instruments, any sound from the darkness is a possibility of something greater than one can imagine. Officially, the bloop was explained as an ice glide, the movement of an underwater mass of ice. But internal NOAA documents indicate that the waveform analysis does not match known natural sources of this kind. The reports call it a similar but not identical profile. Today, bloop has become a symbol of the fact that, even in the age of satellites and the global internet, the biggest, loudest, and most inexplicable things can happen in absolute silence. Because the ocean is not just water. This is the planet's memory. And if one day it speaks, perhaps it is because something deep down there is waking up, or remembering. And it, like the sound, is still only a trial. Just one clap, one breath, one call, away. But not forever. The Damamshud case. Early in the morning of December 1st, 1948, on Somerton Beach, near Adelaide, Australia, passers-by discovered the body of a man lying at the water's edge. He was dressed in a neat suit, his shirt was unmarked, his shoes were polished, and his face showed no sign of pain or fear. He was lying on his back, his head leaning against the breakwater, his arms at his sides. It was immediately clear that he had died recently, and it was not at all clear why. He had no identification, no wallet, no ID, no tickets. The inside tags on his clothes had been carefully cut off. No signs of violence, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Even his fingerprints didn't match any Australian or international databases. It was as if the man had never existed. An autopsy was performed at the morgue. The cause of death remained undetermined. Doctors found signs of internal bleeding, but no traces of poison, no toxins, no drugs, no alcohol. Only the odd thing. The stomach was empty, and the pupils were unusually constricted, as in an opiate overdose. But nothing that could be recorded in a lab was found. A few days later, the police found a tiny piece of paper in a secret inside pocket of his trousers. On it were printed two words, Tamam Shud, a phrase in Persian meaning end, completed. It was later determined that this phrase was torn from the last page of the book Rubaiyat by Omar Khayyam. Police began searching for the original copy, and they found it. One Adelaide resident reported finding the book in his car, left in a parking lot with the doors unlocked, shortly before the incident. On the back of the book is a set of ciphers, strings of letters mixed with symbols that do not match any known codes. None of the cryptographic systems worked. Decipherment failed. The book also included the phone number of a woman who lived in Adelaide. She refused to acknowledge the deceased, but when shown a death mask, she recoiled. She never officially confirmed their acquaintance. It was later revealed that she served as a nurse during the war and was connected to an officer who was involved in radio transmissions. The connection was not proven, but the feeling remained. Local newspapers dubbed the deceased Somerton Man. He was buried with a plaque reading unknown. The site became a pilgrimage site for those looking for espionage, conspiracies, and alternate realities. Over the years, the theory of involvement in intelligence has been put forward more than once. The format of the recording, the letter code, the cut tags, everything matched the handwriting of a professional working in the field. But if this was a spy, why was he set up so openly? Why was he allowed to die publicly? 70 years later, in 2022, the man was identified through genetic testing as Carl Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne. The mystery seemed solved, but the details didn't add up. Why was he in Adelaide without identification? Why did he have a book of codes? Why did no one in his family report him missing? Experts say it's just a sad story that's become a myth. But the myth hasn't disappeared, because it's not about a person. It's about the line between biography and disappearance. Because the name appeared, and the meaning remained where the body found on the beach, in absolute silence, lying at the edge of the water, among phrases that were not finished. Tamam Shud is the end, but not the explanation. Chronicle of the Bloody Swamp. In northern Louisiana, amid the viscous swamps and crackling marshes, there is a stretch of land that locals prefer not to talk about. It is not marked on tourist maps. There are no roads with signs leading there, and even GPS shows its boundaries inaccurately. This place is called Bloody Bog. According to legend, it was named so in the 18th century by French settlers, but there is no official confirmation of this, as well as nothing official. And yet the chronicle of this place exists. Not in archives, not in universities, but in oral histories, in diaries, in half-erased newspaper clippings. Every decade, someone disappears, without a trace, or worse, returns different. The first recorded report dates back to 1851. A local pastor from the village of Laplace wrote to his brother about a wet plain that breathes at night. He described dreams in which he saw the swamp unfold as if opening a mouth. A month later, he was found dead inside his own well, filled not with water but with silt, which was not found in the area. In 1909, a telegraph line was being laid in these areas. Of the 9 workers, 3 disappeared in one day. The rest quit. The contractor's report states refusal due to absurd fear. Officially, the project was frozen, but in an unofficial report sent to headquarters, there is a phrase: the line does not go through because the terrain changes itself at night. In 1967, a local school teacher named John Matthews decided to document the region's folklore. He collected stories from old-timers about singing trees, momentary twilight, and black water that doesn't reflect. One of the narrators said, "If you hear water when it's silent, go away." Matthews disappeared 2 weeks after completing the recordings. His car was found at the edge of a swamp. The tapes were blank. The tapes were clean at all speeds, although the magnetic layer was intact. It was as if the recordings had been erased not by the device, but by the place itself. There are reports of mysterious fauna found nowhere else. Glowing insects woven together as one, voices repeating phrases not in English, not in French, but in a recognizably familiar language. In one case, a man reported that the swamp spoke with the voice of his dead brother. He later disappeared. Local search and rescue teams still refuse to enter certain areas. They call them return zones. These are areas where compasses begin to spin and time, volunteers say, flows differently. One man said he was walking along a trail with a group, turned around at the sound, and found himself alone. It felt like seconds had passed. In reality, 4 hours had passed. In 1998, scientists from a private university tried to conduct a magnetometric scan of a swampy area. The equipment refused to work. A line appeared on the laptop connected to the sensor. You can't measure something that doesn't lie in a straight plane. This was not a system error. It was a printed phrase. None of the specialists could reproduce it. Today, the Bloody Marsh is not a myth or a point on a map. It is a loop in which patterns disappear. A place that refuses to be part of a reality that can be measured and recorded. Perhaps it is just a swamp. Or perhaps it is a place that does not belong only to our time. And then it doesn't wait. It repeats itself, each time a little differently, with a different name, with a different voice, but with the same result. The tracks lead there. But from there, nothing is the same. Not even the air, not even the sound, not even the question itself. What if it's not a creature that lives in this swamp, but the absence of return itself? The mystery of the Tunguska explosion. Morning of June 30th, 1908, Central Siberia. A bright fiery strip appears over the taiga in the area of the Podkamennaya Tunguska River. A few seconds and an explosion. The roar is heard within a radius of 1,000 kilometers. The shockwave knocks down trees over an area of more than 2,000 square kilometers. The explosive impulse is so powerful that it is detected by seismographs all over Eurasia. The light from the flash is observed even in London, but there is not a single crater, not a single piece of debris, only fallen trees and silence. The expedition to the explosion site begins only in 1927. Leonid Kulik leads it. What he sees defies explanation. The center of destruction is perfectly round, but inside the epicenter, trees stand charred, but not fallen. Outside, the forest lies in radial stripes, as if the wave had come from above. But there is no crater, no rocks, no meteorite, no traces of a substance that could be analyzed. Since then, many theories have emerged. The official one is that a meteorite or comet exploded at an altitude of about 8-10 kilometers. But there was nothing left of the meteorite, no dust, no debris. Spectral analysis shows no traces of iron. A comet? But there are no traces of ice either. So what? In the 1960s, Soviet scientists proposed the idea of a nuclear explosion of natural origin, the release of methane, followed by spontaneous combustion in the atmosphere. But not a single chemical trace was found to confirm this. The radiation level is within normal limits. However, some plants exhibited abnormally high mutation rates that had not been previously recorded. Insects collected in the epicenter area decades later had persistent differences in their DNA. Some trees showed double annual growth rings, as if 2 vegetative cycles had occurred in 1 year. In the 2000s, indirect evidence emerged that a few days before the explosion, residents of nearby villages saw a strange glow in the sky, soft, milky blue covering the entire horizon. The light had no source. It cast no shadows. There are versions about a mini black hole that flew into the atmosphere, or about antimatter. Deviations of the Earth's magnetic field were indeed recorded in the Tunguska region within 48 hours after the explosion, but they did not coincide with any of the known types of bursts. Some researchers believe that the object did not fly in from outer space, but came from within, as if something had broken through the geological shell. This theory is based on measurements showing unusual activity in the Earth's crust beneath the epicenter. Anomalous vibrations have been recorded there that should not exist, and what's more important is that they repeat every 62 years. The last such tremor was recorded in the 1970s. The next one will be in the 2030s. Some believe that the 1908 explosion was not a fall, but a flash, as if something trapped in the ground was released for a moment, not completely, but enough to leave an imprint in the air. There were also rumors about traces of unknown structures found in the 1930s and later classified. One of the participants in subsequent expeditions told of a stone with engraved symbols resembling simplified runes. The photo disappeared from the archive. No one has seen the stone since then. Today, the official position remains the same, a meteor. But in the archives of scientists who worked in the epicenter zone, the same phrase is found: it was not a fall, it was an appearance. And if that's true, then the question isn't what happened in 1908, it's what should have happened, but was stopped or delayed, and perhaps not forever. In northern British Columbia, Canada, there is a long stretch of Highway 16. It winds through mountains, forests, and misty plains, connecting sparse settlements. It is officially known as Highway 16, but is popularly known as the Lost Highway, or the Road of the Lost. And it is no coincidence. Since the 1970s, dozens of disappearances have been recorded here, most of them without explanation, trace, or logic. Many of the victims are young women and girls, most of them of indigenous descent. At first it seemed like a coincidence. One case, a tragedy. 2, alarm. But when the number of missing people passed 40, then 60, questions began to arise. Why here? Why didn't the police respond in time? Why was evidence lost? The length of the highway is more than 700 kilometers. Often it goes through absolutely empty areas. No electricity, no gas stations, no communication. Hitchhiking is the only way to travel for those who do not have a car. Many of the missing are hitchhikers. They were the last people seen getting into a van, a truck, or just walking along the side of the road. After that, silence. Phones went silent. Relatives waited. But no one returned. The police often attributed the disappearances to domestic reasons, running away from home, suicide, starting a new life. But the bodies were never found, or they were found years later, in impassable places, with no signs of violence, no clear cause of death. In one case, the remains were lying 300 meters from the highway, but were discovered only 8 years later. Someone said, "It's as if they were put there later." But there are cases that don't even fit into criminal logic. In 1992, a girl named Josie McDonald disappeared. She was seen at a gas station, where she called her mother. 5 minutes later, she was gone. For the next 8 hours, abnormal bursts of radio interference were recorded in the range used by emergency services. No one knew where they were coming from. 4 days later, her backpack was found in the forest. It was dry, although it had been raining for 2 days. Inside was a dictaphone. The recording was of breathing, but not hers. Too deep, too calm. The last sound was a rustle and a man's voice, barely audible. "That's not the way." They put up signs on the highway saying "Caution Disappearance Zone." They hung up signs with help numbers. But people continue to disappear, even today. Some locals say the road is alive, that it takes, that it has repetitions, the same places, the same dates, the same faces. In one village, a woman said she saw a girl in a blue coat on the side of the road, whom she identified as her friend who disappeared 10 years ago. She was standing there, just like then, raising her hand, asking for a ride. The woman did not stop. Officials have finally acknowledged the problem and created a commission. But the reports are too general, too cautious. As if everyone is afraid to say that the disappearances are not random, they are repeated. And if it's not just the work of people, then the Zniknenya Highway is not a road. It's a mechanism, or a cycle, or an access point where reality shifts for a split second, enough for a person to step out of it, without a trace, without a sound, without an explanation, just a lane and the emptiness left behind. The disappearance of Amanda Jones. In August 2005, 26-year-old Amanda Jones arrived in Festus, Missouri, to meet the father of her unborn child. She was 8 months pregnant, had a stable job, an active life, and her family knew about her plans and destination. The meeting was supposed to take place during the day in a public place, near the courthouse. But after that, no one saw her again. Her car was found in the parking lot, locked, keys in her pocket, bag on the front seat, phone turned off, no signs of a struggle, no blood, no witnesses. The building's security cameras recorded her arrival, but not her departure. It was as if she simply disappeared inside, or exited through an unregistered location. Investigators found that she had indeed planned to discuss paternity and future child support with a man, Jerry Pickett. He acknowledged the meeting but claimed she had not shown up. But her cell phone was registering activity near his home. His words began to diverge from the facts. But there was no direct evidence of guilt. No clues, no witnesses, no body. What made this disappearance especially strange was the time of day and the location. Amanda disappeared in the center of a small town during the day, on a hot summer day, in an area where there was always someone walking. No passerby, no court employee, no visitor saw her leave or who she was with. It's as if she's dissolved between two CCTV cameras. The trail ends like bad cuts in a movie. Later, her family received a strange, anonymous call. A female voice quietly and quickly said, "Amanda is here. She doesn't remember." The connection was cut off. The number was inactive. It was not possible to repeat the call. According to one unofficial version, Amanda may have been the victim of something other than just a crime. Some researchers studying soft zones, areas with disruptions in space-time logic, have suggested that the location of her disappearance coincides with a number of other strange incidents that have occurred in the area over the past decades. Sudden memory lapses, navigation failures, disappearances of pets, all within a 4-mile radius. There is a theory that in such zones there is an overlap of realities in which a person can slip, not die, not disappear by force, but simply move to a layer where he is not listed. In such a scenario, Amanda could even continue to live, just not in this coordinate structure, but somewhere nearby, unnoticed. It sounds incredible, but the more time passes, the more obvious it becomes. All attempts to find her here end in nothing, because perhaps she is no longer here, not in our here. Perhaps she stepped over the line, not knowing that such a line exists. And now she's out of reach, not as a witness, not as a victim, not as someone who disappeared. Just a name, just a date, just an empty space where no one goes. A monk standing in the fire, the archives don't lie. On June 11, 1963, in the center of Saigon, the capital of what was then South Vietnam, a blue Austin stopped at an intersection near a busy square, an ordinary car of which there were thousands. Several Buddhist monks emerged from it. One of them, an elderly man with a perfectly shaved head and a calm face, sat down in the lotus position right on the asphalt. His name was Thich Quang Duc. The others poured a canister of gasoline on him. He didn't move when they set him on fire. For 6 minutes, the monk burned in complete silence. No screaming, no convulsions. A crowd gathered around. People were sobbing, screaming, trying to close their eyes. He didn't move. He just sat there and burned until the very end. Later, reporter Malcolm Brown, who took the famous photo, would say, "I was photographing death, but I didn't feel like I was photographing a dying man." This action was a form of protest against the repression of the Buddhist community in the country, but it became more than an act of sacrifice, because even after years, questions remain that do not fit into the framework of reality. First, the body's behavior. Doctors who studied the photographs and reports said the heat shock should have caused an immediate reaction. Screams, spasms, at least one movement, but the monk's face did not change. It didn't grimace. Its eyes were open. It remained in the lotus until the very end, as if the pain had been removed, or something more had been activated. Secondly, the ashes. When the body burned out, an almost perfect form of the skeleton remained. The heart did not burn completely. This is officially recorded. It was extracted in an almost preserved form and later placed in a reliquary. Several attempts to move it were accompanied by strange events. The equipment failed, the glass cracked, one of the monks lost consciousness. The heart was considered incorruptible. It was kept at the temple, and according to some, radiated heat, despite the fact that more than a year had passed. American intelligence agencies monitoring the events in Vietnam included the incident in their analytical reports, not only as an act of protest, but also as an unpredictable psychophysical reaction. One of the CIA employees later wrote in a report, "This is not self-immolation. This is a demonstration of force that is incomprehensible from a physiological point of view." It is a common idea among Buddhist monks that Thich Quang Duc had achieved a state of samadhi, the highest concentration of the mind in which consciousness can separate from the physical body. But even religious texts rarely speak of complete insensitivity to pain. Here, however, there was something beyond meditation. It was a disconnection from physical law. There is a curious document in the archives of the U.S. Propaganda Service, an internal memorandum that examines the question of the impact of such acts on the structure of the perception of reality among the population. There is a phrase, underlined in red, "If a person can voluntarily and without screaming burn himself, what other control can we assume?" Since then, similar acts of self-immolation have been recorded in different parts of the world, but none have repeated the effect, none have retained their form, none have been so unperturbed. Maybe it's just will. Maybe it's absolute acceptance. But there's another possibility, that on that day, at that crossroads, what happened was not what it seemed. That the man became a point of breakthrough through which something greater entered, silently, without gestures, without words, only through flame. And then he didn't burn. He left, leaving only an image. As a reminder, the body can be fire, but consciousness is no longer here. Intercepted radio signals from Saturn. In 2002, staff at a radio observation station in Argentina recorded a narrow-band signal coming from an area of space that coincided with the coordinates of Saturn. This wasn't unique. Planets emit radio noise, especially gas giants like Jupiter and Saturn. But what they heard didn't fit the scientific norm. The signal had a structure, an internal rhythm. It repeated itself as if it contained a fragment, like a pulse or speech. At first, scientists decided that it was an equipment error. But a week later, the signal was repeated, and again, it was received by several observatories, this time in different parts of the Earth. The angle of arrival was the same. The signal delay was stable. It was not a reflection, not radio interference, not a transmission from Earth. Everything pointed to it coming from somewhere near the ring structure of Saturn. It later became known that similar signals had been recorded before, in the 1970s and 1980s, but were never made public. One of the NASA engineers who worked on the Cassini mission claimed that the probe's instruments had also picked up anomalous signals when flying near the rings. In official reports, they were referred to as ring plasma radio noise, but the frequency of these pulses was too precise to be random. Some SETI researchers conducted a spectral analysis of the recording. The signal had phase modulation similar to those used to transmit information over long distances. Its structure contained a repeating pattern of high-frequency pulses, similar to a digital signature. But the main thing was that the content of the signal did not match any of the known natural formats. It did not resemble lightning discharges, turbulence, or magnetospheric oscillations. It sounded like a code, but it could not be deciphered. Later, in 2005, scientists working with the Voyager archives found similar noise in recordings dating back to 1980. But at that time, it was mistaken for an internal glitch. Now it became clear. It was the same structure. Many believe that this is simply a phenomenon that has not yet been described by science. But if the signals do carry information, then a troubling question arises. Who or what could be transmitting a message from an area where there is no solid surface, where there are no stations, where nothing at all should be a stable source of a signal? One hypothesis, put forward by a theoretical physicist from Japan, states that Saturn's rings may be a natural amplifier, a resonator, capable of spreading a signal transmitted from another source. Perhaps not from the planet itself, but from within, from the space that is in constant radio shadow from the Earth. More extreme theories say that Saturn is not just a planet, that the rings are a structure left unnaturally, that they have a built-in transmission system that works not for communication, but for recording. As if someone is listening not to us, but to the space between us. And at the right moment, it gives a splash too short to understand, too long to miss. These signals are rarely spoken of today. The last ones were recorded in 2013. After that, there is silence, or a very deep silence that can only be heard when you learn to distinguish noise from what should not be noise. And maybe this is not a transmission. Maybe it is an answer to a question we have not yet asked. Nan Madol Temple, Micronesia. On the east coast of the island of Pohnpei, in Micronesia, in the Pacific Ocean, lies one of the most mysterious structures of the ancient world, the ruins of the city of Nan Madol. Built right on the water among coral reefs, this complex consists of more than 90 artificial islands connected by stone passages and canals. Each island was formed from massive basalt blocks, laid with such precision that modern engineers find it difficult to replicate the design without the use of modern technology. The blocks weigh between 5 and 20 tons, some weigh more than 50. In total, by rough estimates, more than 250,000 tons of basalt, not mined nearby, were used in the construction. There are no volcanoes on the island capable of producing such rocks. The nearest source is tens of kilometers across the ocean, and it is still unclear how the stones could have been transported by water, especially given that the ancient inhabitants did not have technologies such as lifting mechanisms or complex rafts. Nan Madol, according to local legends, was built by the will of the gods, or by men who came from the sky. Stories tell of two superhuman brothers, Ololo and Oluship, who used a flying stone to move boulders. These myths are often taken as metaphors, but they all point to the fact that the city was built quickly, not by hand, and with the help of an unknown force. The complex itself is organized like a perfectly planned city. There are palaces, burial structures, walls, courtyards. Everything is geometrically verified. The water level inside the canals is stable even during periods of high and low tides. This is impossible without regulation systems. But no mechanisms have been found. The water does not stagnate. The canals remain clean, as if someone is still monitoring the circulation. Locals avoid visiting the ruins at night. They say that footsteps and splashes can be heard, although there are no large animals in these waters. Some claim that after sunset, bubbles start to rise from the underwater part of the city, as if something is breathing underwater. Research has shown that there is a second, submerged structure beneath Nan Madol, ancient stone rows that extend deeper than previously thought. The exact function of the city is unknown. Some believe that it was an administrative and religious center, others that it was a necropolis. But there are those who say it was a portal. On certain days of the year, sunlight filters through the slits in the walls and forms a precise line through the central channels. This has been observed by scientists and tourists. A natural phenomenon? Perhaps. But its precision is too ingenious. Nan Madol was not a city for living. There are no household items, utensils, or kitchen buildings there. But there are a large number of tombs. The place looks like a ritual center, not a settlement, as if something was happening there that did not require a constant presence, only a ritual one. Some claim that it is part of a lost civilization that predates the cultures we know, the Atlantis of the Pacific Ocean, and that its remains are submerged not only in water, but in the structure of the Earth itself. Because if in the ocean, where everything should be destroyed, there still stands a city of incomprehensible basalt, with canals that do not rot and walls that do not fall, it means that someone built it not for themselves, but for someone who was supposed to come later. And if this is true, then Nan Madol is not just ruins. It is a reminder. That knowledge may not be forgotten, but deliberately hidden, under stones, under water, under eyelids. And it is waiting, like the city, waiting not for an explanation, but for a signal. Fresco with an astronaut in Salamanca. In the Spanish city of Salamanca, on the wall of one of the oldest buildings in Europe, the Cathedral of Santa Maria de Medio, there is something that does not fit into the usual visual landscape of the 15th century. Among the ornate stone decorations, along with Gothic arches, angels, griffins, and grapevines, you can see the figure of an astronaut. A spacesuit, a helmet, cables, even gloves and boots, all of this is engraved on the facade of a building built long before man flew into space. And this is not a joke. The sculpture really exists. It is real. And every year it raises more and more questions. The official explanation seems simple. Supposedly, in 1992, during the reconstruction of the facade, one of the restorers decided to insert a modern symbol into the old composition, as a sign of the times. This is called anachronism in art, and is often encountered in architecture. But there are nuances that make one doubt this version. Firstly, the carving style itself is absolutely identical to the neighboring elements created in the 16th century. The patina of the stone is natural, without traces of modern processing. The texture is uniform. If the element was added in the 1990s, it should be different. But the astronaut looks like part of the original composition, not a foreign body. Secondly, photographs of the facade taken by tourists and researchers back in the 1960s already contain the figure. They are not clear, but of sufficient quality to discern the general outline. This contradicts the version about the addition in 1992. At the same time, the official authorities ignore these photographs, citing the lack of an archive. Another detail is the figure's pose. The astronaut is not simply standing. He is breaking out, as if breaking through a wall. His left hand is clutching a ledge, his right is pointing upward, his legs are slightly bent, like a person in zero gravity. This is not a decorative element. This is a scene, an action, and it seems to make sense, but not for the 15th century. Skeptics point out that the figure may have been misinterpreted as not an astronaut, but a stylized angel in armor. But why does he have oxygen tubes? Why are there harnesses on his waist that resemble seatbelts? Why are his feet wearing soles like those on NASA spacesuits? Some researchers have put forward a hypothesis. The fresco is not an anachronism, but a trace of ancient knowledge. Perhaps it was restored in the Middle Ages according to an older model, lost or destroyed earlier. In this case, the cathedral is not the original source, but a copy that has carried over a fragment from the past, which remembers more than it should. There is also an extreme version. The fresco is a warning, a coded image of what is coming down or has already arrived. For in the vicinity of Salamanca, in the monastery archives, there are records of a man in shining armor who appeared in the square and disappeared into the light. Date, 1537. Coincidence? Possibly. Or a hint that remained, because even then they knew that one day we would find out. And the fresco is not for believers, not for tourists. It is for those who will one day raise their eyes and see in the stone not just a figure, but a memory, that the contact had already been, but encrypted by stone, by shadow, by facade, in plain sight, but timeless. In 1942, while laying a drainage system in the marshy lands near the village of Vexi in Denmark, workers came across a strange metal object. It was carefully removed from the peat layer, and soon became clear. It was an iron helmet, decorated with a pair of curved horns. It was almost completely intact, covered in a green coating of oxidation, but still retained its shape. Initially, archaeologists attributed it to the Viking Age, since the image of a warrior with a horned helmet is deeply rooted in popular culture. However, upon closer examination, it turned out that this artifact does not belong to the Vikings. It is older, much older. Modern analysis dates the find to the 9th century BC. This makes it one of the oldest iron masks found in Europe, and it does not fit into any known culture of the region at that time, neither in form nor in symbolism. On the inside of the helmet, barely discernible engravings were found, wavy lines, repeated around the circumference. They do not match known runic systems, but are strangely reminiscent of an electrical diagram, as if the symbolism were not ritual, but technical in nature. A fragment of an amber insert was found on one of the horns, in which, under a microscope, microscopic bubbles with traces of metallic dust were found. How and why it got there was not explained. Scientists have long argued, the purpose of the helmet is unclear. It is not intended for combat, too heavy, too open. The horns are vulnerable. It is probably a ritual object, but the horns are directed forward, not upward, as is common in Bronze Age cult objects. This creates a sense of function, not symbolism. What is also interesting is that this is not the only find. Similar horned masks, albeit in a more fragmentary form, have been found in Spain, Sardinia, and even in the south of Sweden. All date back to about the same time, all without a cultural context, all in swamps, where preservation is achieved only with complete isolation from oxygen, as if someone deliberately dipped them there to preserve or to hide. One version says that the helmet is not a protective item, but a key element of the communication system. Its shape creates resonance at certain frequencies. Acoustic scientists have confirmed that if you recreate the helmet and pronounce sounds inside it, a clear vibration wave arises that deviates from the standard frequencies of human speech, as if the helmet was designed for hearing and transmitting in a range other than ours. Scandinavian mythology mentions creatures with horns speaking to the sky. These lines have always been considered a poetic metaphor, but if the artifact from Vexay is a genuine carrier of such a function, then it is possible that we are dealing not with an attribute of a priest or a warrior, but with a device intended for contact with what is unknown. At the Copenhagen Museum, where the helmet is kept today, the display case is surrounded by modern glass filters. The staff say, to protect against moisture. But one of the internal records leaked to the press mentions that anomalous electromagnetic surges were recorded in the room after the display case was installed. They could not be reproduced, only recorded. So what was it? A decoration, a forgotten technology, or a warning? Maybe this helmet is not for head protection, but for the reception of the signal, which sounded long ago, or perhaps still sounds, only we do not hear, because we do not have what was worn before us. Horns forward, not up, not to the sky, but towards what is approaching. Crimson rains in Kerala, India. From July to September 2001, purple-red rains began to fall in the southern Indian state of Kerala. The first drops were seen in the city of Changanassery. People initially thought it was blood. Then came the chemicals. Puddles in the streets turned scarlet. Clothes were permanently stained, but there was no smell. The precipitation lasted for several minutes, but fell regularly. Sometimes at night, sometimes at dawn, sometimes during the day. Sometimes one rain followed another after several hours. The phenomenon affected more than 100 settlements. And this was not an isolated incident. Similar red rains had fallen in the region before, in 1896, 1957, and 1970. But in 2001, the scale was unprecedented. Scientists began an investigation. The first explanation, there was desert dust in the air. However, water samples collected immediately after the rain showed not dust, but a cellular structure. Under a microscope, the drops were found to contain red, oval shapes with a dense shell, reminiscent of bacterial spores, but no DNA was found in them. Repeated analyses in several countries yielded similar results, an organic structure with no signs of life. The strangest thing happened later. Researcher Godfrey Lewis from Mahatma Gandhi University said that these particles are capable of self-reproduction at high temperatures, over 300 degrees Celsius. No known life form on Earth can withstand such conditions. Moreover, the particles did not burn under normal heat treatment. They behaved like dormant organisms awaiting activation. Lewis speculated that they were an extraterrestrial life form delivered to Earth through the atmosphere, perhaps on a micrometeorite. His theory was called fantastic. He was criticized. But independent laboratories confirmed, yes, the structure of these particles is unusual. Yes, they do not contain DNA in the usual form. Yes, they are resistant to extreme conditions. To the question, if not dust or bacteria, what is it? No one gave an answer. Some hypotheses spoke of a genetic injection, as if the Earth was being seeded, not to infect, but to test a reaction, or to mark a point. And Kerala was not chosen by chance. It is home to one of the most ancient cultural centers, where legends have already described rains of blood as a harbinger of change. Other researchers went even further. If we assume that particles are not just a form of life, but carriers of information, then their activity at temperature is not reproduction, but unpacking of code. Then red rain is not ecology, but transmission. In 2013, the phenomenon repeated itself briefly and in a different area. Authorities quickly dismissed it as a natural effect of evaporation and pollen. But the data showed, again, the same particles, the same properties, the same silence in the official reports. Today, drops with the same composition are stored in laboratories. They are not shown. They are not studied openly. Because the question is not where they come from, but what will happen if one day the rain turns from crimson to black, and then the sky will no longer be just the sky. it will become a carrier of what was already here, or what is waiting to be awakened, by chance or on command. Rocks that move in Death Valley. On the dry bottom of Racetrack Playa, a deserted section of Death Valley in California, dozens and hundreds of stones lie among the cracked clay shell. At first glance, they are ordinary, smooth, dark, weighing from a couple of kilograms to several dozen. But if you stay here longer than a tourist walk, you will notice the main thing. These stones move, and they leave traces behind them. Not in your presence, no, but you come back the next day and see. They have moved, sometimes by tens of meters. The trace of each one is a thin furrow in the clay, as if someone was slowly pulling the stone. In a straight line, in an arc, in a spiral. Some turn. Some change direction. Sometimes two stones move side by side and then move apart, leaving a perfectly synchronized trace, like in a mirror. This is not a legend. It is recorded. Cameras are installed. Measurements are taken. Scientists have proposed a version. Supposedly a thin layer of water formed after rain covers the clay, then thin ice on top, the wind blows, and the stone slowly slides. But this version does not explain all the movements. For example, why do some stones move, while others remain motionless, although they are in the same layer of water? Why do stones sometimes make a sharp turn at an angle of 90 degrees? Why, finally, can the same stone rest for years, and then move 70 meters in one night? There are recorded cases where movement occurred without visible wind and without water. The furrow remained fresh. The clay was wet. The stone was displaced, as if something had passed under it, or from within. Local Indian tribes have known about these stones for centuries. They called them living spirits looking for a way out. They forbade spending the night on the playa. They said that if you fall asleep next to such a stone, you too will start moving. But you will not wake up in the same place. Some researchers have put forward extreme hypotheses. Maybe it is the residual effect of a geophysical resonance associated with an ancient magnetic anomaly. Maybe it is a point where the density of space fluctuates and solid bodies become capable of microshifts, not in the usual physics, but in something parallel. There was even a theory that the stones do not move, but are rewritten, as if their position in space changed not gradually, but with a break, instantly, just a trace remains, because clay is memory. Scientists continue to study, but everything still comes down to a strange simplicity. Stones move where nothing should move, without reasons, without forces, without spectators. Which means maybe they are not just moving, they are following a route, the same one that was once set, or given, not to them, but to the earth, and they are simply marking it for us. In complete silence, and in complete clarity, movement is not always life. Sometimes it is a signal. Night of the Hotel Cecil. The Cecil Hotel, located in downtown Los Angeles, has long acquired a reputation as the city's most sinister place. Since its opening in 1927, more than 60 deaths have occurred within the building's walls. Suicides, murders, mysterious disappearances, falls from upper floors. It has been a temporary refuge for serial killers, including Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Many consider him cursed. But there is a story that is rarely discussed, even in the context of all the other horrors. A story involving a man in armor who appeared one night and disappeared forever. They called him the Knight of Cecil. In January 2005, a hotel security guard reported that around 3 a.m., security cameras captured a figure dressed in metal armor slowly climbing the fire escape stairs. The metal gleamed in the dim light. The figure moved slowly but surely and without sound. No scraping, no banging, just movement. At first they thought it was someone in a suit, a setup, or an eccentric guest. But when they checked the registration logs, there was no one in armor. The cameras at the elevators and entrances also did not record his arrival. He appeared, as if from inside the building, from the 4th floor. Cameras watched him climb the stairs to the roof. There was no camera there. When security got there 10 minutes later, there was no one on the roof. Just footprints, not dirty, not wet. Heavy metal boot prints pressed into the gravel. That same night, the power went out in several rooms at the hotel. Guests reported a sudden drop in temperature, strange sounds like clicking or scraping in pipes. One man on the 5th floor called the police, claiming that someone in a shiny suit was standing outside his door breathing like an iron mask. In the morning, the camera footage was copied, but when it was played back, it turned out that the image was distorted. The armor was glaring as if the light was not reflected, but absorbed. There were no faces, signs, or symbols on the armor. Only smooth plates, a semi-matte shine, and absolutely unrealistic joint mobility. Rumors spread quickly. Some said it was an actor. Some said it was a fan of role-playing games. But then details emerged. One historian, upon seeing the footage, said, "This is not a modern reconstruction. This is a copy of 14th century armor, precisely down to the riveting technology. Only they don't make things like that in the US, especially with behavior like that." It later emerged that in the archived newspapers of 1932, there was a note about a man seen on the roof of the Hotel Cecil, in dark armor, shining like a mirror. At the time, it was written off as an urban myth, but the coincidence is too precise. Date, place, description. And in that case, no one found out how he got in, or left. Today, the Night of Cecil is an urban legend, but those who worked in the building at night say sometimes you can hear something moving upstairs. Not like a person, like metal, sliding, inhale, pause, and then silence again. And if it really exists, why does it appear? It doesn't attack. It doesn't speak. It doesn't signal. It just moves up, the roof, and disappears, as if checking the floor or waiting for a command, for a signal, for a coincidence of date. Maybe it doesn't guard. Maybe it's the guardian of the failure. It appears when something happens inside the building that shouldn't happen. And its presence is not a threat, but a reaction, a mechanism that doesn't come from the past, but from a layer where time doesn't flow, but cyclically compresses. And Cecile is just an entry point, open on one side and only sometimes on the other. Underground prison blackout. Hidden beneath the very center of London, in an area that today appears peaceful and civilized, is a system of tunnels not marked on public maps. These structures were originally built as air raid shelters during World War II. Then, according to official data, they were used to service the telephone infrastructure. But there is a tunnel that is not listed in the registers. Its coordinates are known only to a limited number of people. Inside it, according to those who once approached the zone, is what is called the Blackout Prison, a place where they imprison not criminals but information. The prison was first revealed in an anonymous letter sent to a British scientific journal in 1998. The author claimed to have worked for the government security service and to have seen a facility that held people with unreliable psychophysics. The letter included a diagram of the underground complex: corridors, overlapping zones, 2 chambers, acoustic, and mirror. At the same time, the author insisted that there is no security in the blackout prison in the usual sense of the word. The contents are isolated not by force but by the structure of the space. Later, other sources began to confirm this information. Missing scientists, archivists, military communications officers. They all hinted at a certain blank spot under the city, where something was happening that could not be explained legally. One of the most terrifying details is the behavior of electricity in this place. When trying to install surveillance cameras in the dungeon, the devices refuse to work. Some witnesses reported that lights start to blink, compasses to spin. Even the voice on the radio is heard with a delay and distortion. It is as if the prison itself is jamming surveillance, not blocking, distorting. According to unconfirmed reports, blackout contains people who have developed abnormal perceptions, the ability to hear ultrasound, see in complete darkness, and predict the appearance of radio interference. In some cases, there are outbursts of speech in languages they never knew. They are not treated. They are not interrogated. They are left in cells covered with mirrors, supposedly to reduce internal vibrations. In 2011, a plan of the tunnels under Holborn was accidentally published in the city archives. 2 days later, the document disappeared. But a copy fell into the hands of researchers. It showed an unnamed tunnel leading to a dead end with a rectangle marked "Observation temporarily suspended." There is an opinion that blackout does not protect someone, but it holds back a malfunction, that there is no person sitting inside the chamber, but a distorted form, something that was the result of contact that should not have happened. And if you open the doors, something will start to sound or see. Some are sure that one day the tunnel will be found by chance, by builders, diggers, secret hunters. And if this happens, no one should talk to the one who comes out first, because he may not even know that he came out, or he may just be a bearer of silence that someone decided to lock, but not forever. Archival footage of living dinosaurs in Africa. In 1983, an unknown videotape labeled Mokalim Bembe Footage J Reserve entered the private collection of an American cryptozoologist. Its origins remained unclear. It's grainy 16mm film, obviously shot on an old camera with no narration, just the hum of the jungle. And one scene, For 43 seconds, the camera captures a huge figure moving slowly through shallow water among dense vegetation. The creature was massive, on 4 legs, with a long neck and a thick muscular back. The head was small, with an elongated silhouette. Everything resembled a sauropod, like in the reconstructions of ancient prehistoric animals. Only it was filmed, not in a museum but in the real jungles of Central Africa. This is one of the most controversial pieces of evidence for the existence of a mythical creature called Mokele Mbembe, which means he who stops the river, in Lingala. References to it go back centuries. Local tribes describe it as a huge beast that lives in swampy areas, hides from people, and is capable of capsizing canoes and destroying anything that comes close to its territory. The scientific community is skeptical about these stories, but there are facts that do not disappear. In 1913, German officer Ludwig Freiherr von Stein reported seeing a strange beast resembling a brontosaurus while moving along a river. His report was classified, but fragments later surfaced in German archival publications. In 1966, a French missionary group claimed to have heard a low growl at night and observed a huge shape breaking trees in the floodplain. The sound was recorded, but the tape was damaged, allegedly by humidity. In 2009, an American expedition with naturalists from Canada returned with no finds, but one of the participants committed suicide a month after the trip. Before that, he told his friends, "Some creatures should not be filmed, because they are not here but they have not gone away." The 1983 videotape itself was studied by imaging specialists. No editing was found. The size of the creature is comparable to that of an adult Indian elephant, but the proportions are different. There are no traces of a person in the frame. Only bird cries, the sound of water and the operator's breathing rhythm. Rapid, as if he is filming something he himself does not believe he can see. Today, this fragment is part of a closed archive, with copies distributed among private collections. They refuse to publish it in the public domain because of the rights to the original. But there are screenshots. There are descriptions. There is confirmation that in the jungle, where no one lives, where there are no tourist routes, something huge still breathes. Some believe that Mokele Mbembe is not a surviving dinosaur, but a window into the past, a spatial seam through which a fragment of time can flow backwards. And then the creature is not alive in the usual sense. It is a recording stuck in space, a projection of biology slipping out of time, but still reflected, like an echo of an era that has not disappeared, but continues to sound. Only in those places where no one will hear or dare to admit that they heard. Cultists in Antarctica, 1965. In the archives of the United Nations, there is an undisclosed report, dated 1965, marked for internal use only. It mentions an incident that occurred during a joint international Antarctic expedition conducted in the Queen Maud Land region. Officially, it was a mission to study ice sheets and meteorological conditions. Unofficially, it was a study of anomalies recorded near one of the oldest cracks in the Antarctic ice, where equipment was transmitting signals that did not match natural resonances. According to the report, one of the teams, consisting of 5 people, left the camp without permission in the 7th week of the expedition. Their last radio contact was at 2:14. They spoke of light beneath the surface and whispers not in the ears but in the bones. An attempt was made to bring them back, but it was too late. Communication was lost, and 8 hours later, the team disappeared from radar. When they were found, only 4 days later, the tent was carefully pitched on the glacier, with no signs of storms or attack. There is not a single person inside, only notes. In the notebooks, there are diagrams, circles, lines in Latin and Norwegian, but without any semantic coherence. On one of the pages, "We heard the first sound. It is under the ice. It is inside us." The camera's contents were also alarming. Several images captured what appeared to be giant geometric structures beneath the ice surface. None were natural. Some resembled megaliths. Others were perfect circles, burned or melted into a layer at least 15 meters deep. Local coordinators decided to end the mission, but the details of what happened were not made public. The incident was written off as a violation of protocols, and the photographs disappeared from public records. Later, in 1973, one of the surviving members of the core group, Dr. Franz Warner, wrote a secret letter to a scientific journal in which he claimed, "Some of those who had left returned, but they were not the ones who had left. Their eyes were empty. They looked inside themselves as if there was someone else inside. They were silent. They waited. Since then, All expeditions to the area have been strictly under military supervision. Maps of the area are either closed or contain false coordinates. Satellite images are blurry, as if there is a signal processing failure in this area. A hypothesis has emerged among ufologists and alternative historians. Antarctica may contain more than just a structure, an object emitting an effect incompatible with human perception, and that the cultists, as they were called in the reports, were not sectarians in the usual sense. They were primary perceivers, those who heard. And if even part of this is true, then the question is not what they found under the ice, but what called them. And who was the first to understand that the peace of the ice sheets is not silence, it is expectation? Too ancient to be earthly, and too precise to be accidental. The mysterious WOW signal. On August 15, 1977, at the Ohio State University Observatory, volunteer astronomer Jerry Amon was looking at data printouts from the Big Ear radio telescope when he saw something that instantly stood out from all the graphs. A narrow radio signal at 1,420 megahertz that lasted 72 seconds. It was so powerful, clear, and unusual that Amon circled it in red pen on the printout and wrote on the side, "Wow." Thus began one of the most famous mysteries in the history of astronomy. The signal was coming from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, an area where there are no known stellar objects capable of emitting such a frequency. It matched exactly the hydrogen line, the frequency that scientists consider most logical for transmitting interstellar messages because it is universal to all water-based life forms. The signal was extremely concentrated, with a clear start, peak, and fall. It didn't repeat, it didn't blink, it didn't waver, it just sounded, once, and it was gone. No observatory in the world could detect it again. Scientists have tried to explain it by natural sources, reflected satellite noise, a weather anomaly, a meteor, but none of the versions have stood up to scrutiny. The hydrogen line frequency is internationally prohibited for technical transmission. That is, no device on Earth should use it, especially not with such power. The extraterrestrial theory immediately sparked a storm of controversy. Some claimed it was a test signal, as if something or someone wanted to see if anyone was listening back. After all, at that moment, the Big Ear was listening in the mode of searching for alien signals, as if the addressee knew that at that moment, there would be an ear. Since then, dozens of attempts have been made to listen to the same point, with different devices, in different years. But nothing similar has been recorded. Some suggest that the signal could have come not from a constant point, but from an object passing by. In this case, we simply missed it. What is even stranger is the reaction of some structures. A year after the data was published, one of the observatory technicians reported that people who did not officially introduce themselves came to the building at night. They checked the servers, removed old tapes. They said it was a routine check, but since then, some of the original data is considered lost. Only paper copies remained. There are theories that the signal was a response, not a random one, but a reflection of what we ourselves once sent into space. A kind of ping, like in a radar system. We sent it, it returned. Only not to where we expected. And not from there. Today, WOW remains one of the few signals that has never been rationally explained. It's featured on every list of mysteries of the universe. It's become a meme, a symbol. But no one could decipher the signal itself, because perhaps it didn't carry a message. It was just there, like a note, like a pulse, like a single fragment of presence, too brief to be captured, too precise to be forgotten. And if it was a voice, then it said everything it wanted with one sound and fell silent, because it understood, we are not yet ready to answer, or we have already answered, but did not understand that it was a dialogue. SOS signal from a deserted island. In 2009, a group of amateur radio operators operating on 21.748 megahertz picked up a faint, barely audible signal that resembled Morse code. It repeated every 18 minutes and contained the same pattern of dots and dashes, the International Distress Signal SOS. At first, they thought it was a training transmission or an accidental reflection, but the signal was too regular, too clear, and, most importantly, always came from the same direction. The azimuth pointed to a region southeast of Madagascar, a stretch of the Indian Ocean with no permanent shipping lanes, underwater cables, or recorded radio stations. The closest was a small, uninhabited island called Île aux Serpents, or Snake Island. It had no infrastructure, was unvisited by tourists, and was uninhabited. Satellite photography did not record anything unusual on the island, but when attempting to check the point on the ground, the expedition failed. Several teams sent to the coordinates turned back due to bad weather, navigation failure, and equipment failure. One boat reported that 30 miles from the island, the compass began to rotate and the GPS gave an error, unknown zone. Meanwhile, the signal continued to come, with the same rhythm, with the same power, every 18 minutes. Experts confirmed the transmission was coming from analog equipment at a level typical of radio stations of the mid-20th century. This is what alarmed me the most. Someone had to be constantly powering the source. There are no solar panels on that island, no towers, no automated beacons. So either the transmitter is autonomous, which is impossible for such a long time, or someone is still on the island. In 2012, a French engineer spoke at an international radar conference and said, "This signal is not a call for help. It is a replica that continues without the sender." He suggested that a device abandoned long ago might continue transmitting in a loop that is tied to the energy of the wave itself, a rare effect called a radio-parasitic loop. But then another question arises. Who installed it? When? And why? The oldest recordings of a similar signal are in the archives of 1971. Only then it was transmitted at a different frequency and a different pulse length, as if it changed over time or adapted. The strangest thing, in 2015, the signal disappeared, suddenly, without any gradual weakening, just disappeared. But exactly 72 hours later, a single pulse was recorded on the same frequency, not SOS, but a short fragment. This is not part of the Morse alphabet, but coincidentally in the Roman system it can be read as the symbol K. It was not repeated. If this signal is not noise, not an error, not an atmospheric parasite, then we are dealing with a transmission system left by someone who knew that Earth would someday listen, and the island is just an anchor, or a contact point not for rescue, but to check the connection, and if it is broken, maybe because the connection is established. Or conversely, there was no response. The case of the toothless woman, Norway. In November 1970, in Norway's Isdal Valley, an ice valley near the city of Bergen, a local fisherman walking along a trail came across the burnt body of a woman. It was lying among the rocks, far from any settlements, in a place that locals had long avoided. They called it Death Valley because of the many accidents and suicides. But this case turned out to be much more mysterious. The woman was burned beyond recognition. Her clothes were half melted. Nearby were suitcases hidden under a rock. Inside were women's clothes, glasses without lenses, spoons with worn-out engravings, and bottles of a powerful sleeping pill. No passport, no personal items, no identification. All tags had been cut off the things. An analysis of the body revealed oddities. The woman had no teeth. They had all been removed, and in their place were expensive porcelain dentures, rare even by the standards of Western Europe in the 1970s. Traces of sleeping pills were in her stomach, but not a lethal dose. She was still alive when the fire started. Cause of death, smoke inhalation. That is, she did not die instantly. A police investigation revealed that she had stayed at several hotels under different names in the 2 weeks before her death, registering at each with a new passport. Sometimes she spoke German, sometimes she spoke English with an accent, sometimes she spoke a language no one recognized. The staff described her as both elegant and alien. She always asked for a room by the window, and she changed places often. All documents provided upon check-in turned out to be fake. A letter was found written in a strange code, a sequence of numbers and letters that could not be deciphered. It was assumed that this was a system of roots or symbols. One of the strangest details. Next to the body, a small burnt note was found, on which only 3 words survived. Don't remember the face. The police considered many versions: suicide, murder, espionage. The last one seemed especially convincing. 1970, Cold War. Norway is a strategic point between the USSR and the USA. The woman moved like an agent, changed her appearance, avoided cameras, and disappeared, the way information carriers disappear, not individuals. But why burn yourself? Or who burned her? If it was liquidation, why was the body left in plain sight? Or was it a warning? In 2005, there was an attempt to exhume and reanalyze the Isdal woman case. They used DNA technology that was previously unavailable. They established that she came from Central Europe, perhaps Austria or Yugoslavia, nothing more. Her face was reconstructed, a 3D model was created, published. Not a single person, not a single database gave a match. And then the question arose, what if she was not supposed to be identified? What if she existed not as a person, but as a function? A connection? Surveillance? Maybe she wasn't the first link, but the last one. The one who had to take the information and disappear. Burn herself to erase the route, remove the trace, stop the question. Strange book, Codex Seraphinianus. In 1981, one of the most mysterious books ever published was published in Rome, Codex Seraphinianus, or the Seraphinian Code. The author was the Italian architect and designer Luigi Serafini. It looks like an encyclopedia of a fantasy world. Hundreds of pages, illustrations, diagrams, maps, anatomical diagrams, images of unknown creatures and mechanisms. Everything is done in an incredibly detailed and academic style. But there is one peculiarity. The entire book is written in a fictional language, with a font that cannot be deciphered. Since the book appeared, no cryptographer, linguist, or artificial intelligence has been able to decipher it. The pages are full of signs that have a structure, uppercase letters, lowercase letters, punctuation. But language has no lexical repetitions, which means that either it does not lend itself to a familiar structure, or it is not a language, or language is not for us. The book itself is divided into chapters, like a real encyclopedic reference book. Flora, fauna, physics, sociology, technology. On one page are fish growing on trees. On another, a man turning into a crocodile and then into furniture. There are maps of non-existent countries. There are flight diagrams reminiscent of the work of gravity engines. And all this is designed not as art, but as a textbook. Serafini admitted in an interview that the book is not meant to be understood. He claims that he created it in a state close to trance, that he did not write the code, but the code was dictated by himself. This may sound like artistic exaggeration, but the fact is that the structure of the language is so strict and thought out that the feeling of dictation seems more plausible than an arbitrary set of signs. Some researchers believe that the code is an attempt to create a universal metalanguage through which not a specific culture, but the very structure of consciousness itself, can communicate. Others, that the book is borrowed from dreams and is a signal from another perception. There is even a hypothesis that the Codex is an adapted artifact, rewritten by Serafini from something he found or received but did not explain. One of the most disturbing moments. In 2013, a group of programmers, analyzing repetitions in the letters of the book, discovered that some pages respond to others, as if the text contained dialogue scattered across different chapters. These repeating patterns are not linear, they are fractal, and they may not be read from left to right, but inward, in a spiral. The Codex is still being printed. Publishers issue it as an art object, but not a single issue contains any explanations. All translations are just attempts to describe the images. But the original text remains untouched, and this no longer looks like an accident. Rather, like a condition. Some believe that the Codex is not a book, but a key. To what is unknown, to perception, to memory, to a different state of mind. Maybe it wasn't created to be read, but to start a process. And if one day someone sees a page in a dream, not from the Codex but before it, then the process has started. Because maybe it wasn't the author who invented the alphabet, but the alphabet chose its bearer. And now the book is just waiting for someone to remember how to read. Not by translating, but by hearing. Flight 914. On July 2nd, 1955, a Douglas DC-4 passenger plane took off from New York Airport, bound for Miami. There were 57 people on board, 4 crew members, and 53 passengers. The weather was clear, no technical malfunctions were recorded. But a few minutes after takeoff, communication with the plane was lost. No distress signal, no deviations from the course. It simply disappeared from the radar. A massive search was launched. The suspected route, potential crash zones, even international borders were checked. Nothing. No debris, no fuel, not a single item that would indicate a crash. The plane and its people were declared missing. And then, on September 9th, 1992, 37 years later, in Venezuelan airspace near Caracas, air traffic controllers detected an unidentified object entering the zone without permission. Communication was established with difficulty. The response was, "This is Flight 914 from New York. We are heading to Miami." At first, the controllers thought it was a mistake or a cruel joke. But an old 4-engine airliner, corresponding to the DC-4 model, appeared on the screen. Its registration number is identical to that of the missing flight of 1955. The captain answered confidently, but used phrases and protocols from 50 years ago. There was no panic in his voice, only surprise. According to the pilot, only 1 hour had passed since takeoff. When controllers announced the date and that nearly 4 decades had passed, communication was lost. The plane abruptly changed course and flew out of sight. It was never seen again. Officially, the story is considered an urban legend, fueled by a series of newspaper articles purportedly based on interviews with eyewitnesses. But archival research shows that Flight 914 did exist, and the disappearance date matches. Some of the names of passengers are listed as missing, and to this day they are listed as unfound. Photos of the plane, allegedly taken during the Caracas incident, have not been confirmed as authentic. But one former airport worker said in an interview, "It was like something from the past. Even the smell, like old books. All the windows were open, people were looking out, and their faces were like someone who had just taken off." Some theorists hypothesize that the plane entered a time anomaly, a kind of pocket in which time either stopped or slowed to zero. This could not have been intentional teleportation, but a function of space that manifested itself at the moment of coincidence. Geographical, atmospheric, energetic. Others believe that the plane was part of an experiment involving time distortion. Perhaps its disappearance was not the result of a mistake, but an attempt to test the impact on the chronostructure. And when the plane returned, the system considered it a leak and deleted it back. What scares me most is not that it appeared, it's that it disappeared again. Because if it's possible, if space can let go of the forgotten and take it back, then nothing disappears forever. It's just waiting for the right moment. And maybe there are other flights in the sky already, not on schedule, but on memory, and one of them is already approaching. The mystery of Signal 112, Poland. On November 13th, 2013, in southern Poland, near the town of Zdzieszowice, an emergency operator received an alarming call on 112. There was a child's voice on the line, a girl, about 9 years old. She spoke quietly, restrainedly, repeating the same thing. "He's in the room. I don't know how he got here. He's not talking." The operator tried to ask the standard questions: where she was, who was with her, were there any adults nearby? But the girl answered only in short phrases. Every few seconds, the connection was interrupted by static, then restored. 5 minutes into the call, she said, "He's looking at me, but he's not breathing." Then the line went dead. The automatic call location system showed that the call came from a forested area where there were no houses. Police and rescuers immediately went there. They searched the area but found no phone, no child, no traces of human presence. Only at the edge of the forest, in the snow, stood a chair. One. Simple, wooden, with no traces of where it had been brought from. It was dry, unlike the ground. What's even stranger is that the number from which the call was made was not listed in the operator's registry. It was an inactive SIM card registered to a non-existent name. Moreover, the station's log showed that the signal lasted longer than the actual call, and the call was recorded even after the connection was lost. The next day, the operator who took the call volunteered to re-examine the area. He claimed that after the call, he began to hear the girl's voice in his sleep, repeating the same phrase. He was subsequently hospitalized with acute sleep disorder, deliriously repeating, "He's not moving, but he's already inside." An internal investigation by the Polish police concluded, false call, source unknown. But one of the technical specialists saved the audio file. Upon subsequent analysis, low-frequency modulations were detected in the background noise frequencies that were not typical of normal interference. Their structure resembled radar activation, as if the signal was not simply transmitted, but activated something on the receiving side. Some have suggested that it was an experiment, perhaps psychophysical. Some have said that the call could be an information loop, an echo of an event that happened in another time, but is breaking through into the present. Others believe that it was not a person making the call, but a system reproducing the voice, not out of compassion, but as an attention trap. Locals still avoid that forest. They say that sometimes they hear calls there that cannot be, that a slowly rotating light appears on the outskirts as if the screen is paused, that the equipment turns off, and that children playing nearby begin to repeat other people's phrases without understanding. And if this is not a joke, not a mistake, not malicious intent, then the signal 112 from the forest became not a request for help, but a marker of the place where the entrance is already open, not to save, but to check who will answer and how many times. Disappearance of Mikhail Demchenko, USSR. In November 1984, in a secret village in the Sverdlovsk region of the USSR, an object that is referred to in the archives as Point 12G, junior research fellow Mikhail Demchenko disappeared. He worked in a research unit that developed new materials with anomalous electromagnetic properties. According to the official version, he participated in the Crystal Memory Project. According to the unofficial version, he participated in a project related to the recording of unstable physical fields. On the day of his disappearance, Demchenko did not show up for his shift. His room was locked from the inside. On the bed was an unpacked change of clothes. On the nightstand was a cold mug of tea. All his things were in place. Only one item was missing, a notebook with notes that he always kept with him. Nobody activated the access system to the premises. There are no camera recordings. As it turned out later, the magnetic tapes were rewritten overnight, although there was no automatic rewriting. The security saw nothing. There are no traces of an exit. 48 hours after the disappearance, one of the laboratory engineers found a piece of paper on Demchenko's desk with a handwritten note. "It's not him, and it's not me. It's between." The paper was confiscated, but a copy was kept in the shift supervisor's personal archive. He later claimed that the writing changed shade every time he looked at it. It may sound like a hallucination, but he wasn't the only one who noticed it. The investigation lasted 2 months. Demchenko was not found. His disappearance was classified as possible desertion, despite the absurdity of the version. He was loyal, hardworking, and had no reason to disappear. All materials of his work were classified. But later, in 1991, during the release of the archives, something interesting emerged. In one of the closed volumes, it was not his name that appeared, but Demchenko Phase 2, as if they were not looking for a person, but a condition. Those who worked with him told strange stories, that he complained of a shift in time perception, as if the clock in his room was lagging behind the outside world, that he saw shadows that did not correspond to objects, that he felt a pressure on the air, as if space were becoming viscous. Colleagues thought it was a consequence of fatigue, but now they are not so sure. It later emerged that in the laboratory where Demchenko worked, experiments were being conducted with structures that simulated a closed time loop at the microscopic level. They called it a time cell, a region in which 1 second could be captured, slowed down, and observed in isolation. The experiments were considered failures. But what if one of them got out of control? Ghosts on TV, Florida, 1979. In October 1979, in St. Petersburg, Florida, a short, sudden interruption appeared on local television screens for 3 consecutive nights. It occurred during the regular evening news at about 9:53 p.m. The signal would jump for a split second. The screen would go dark, and then a fragment would appear. A camera with interference would show a windowless room where a man in dark clothes was sitting. He was not moving. He was not speaking. He was just looking into the lens. Then the picture would disappear, and the normal broadcast would continue as if nothing had happened. Local television company WNTB could not explain the failure. All 3 evenings, the technical department recorded complete signal stability and no external interference. Archive recordings of the broadcast did not contain the insertion, including even on tapes with a direct duplicate of the signal. Only home VCRs, recording the broadcast manually, preserved the moment, on all of them. The same fragment, the same parameters. The Federal Communications Commission conducted an inspection. No violations were found. But one of the engineers admitted to journalists unofficially that the insertion was not implemented through the broadcast channel, but as if from inside the receiver. It is impossible from a technical point of view. But in each house where the insertion was recorded, different antennas, different TV models, different providers were used. There was nothing in common. One owner of a VHS camera, having decided to watch the recording frame by frame, discovered on the last frame before the figure disappeared some unclear but clearly readable symbols. They did not correspond to the alphabet. They looked like a mixture of Cyrillic, Latin, and mathematical symbols. Later, researchers compared them with fragments of text from old Slavonic magical formulas for expelling trapped souls. A few weeks later, the strangeness continued. Several WNTB employees complained of headaches, insomnia, and the feeling that they were remembering someone else's life. One editor was hospitalized after seeing the same figure not on the screen, but in a reflection in the black panel of the monitor. In 1980, the television company carried out an internal reconstruction and changed all the equipment. Since then, the insertion has not been repeated. But the tapes disappeared. Only digital copies remained, passed between paranormal researchers. Some believe it was a hacker attack. Others believe that an unknown experimental attention management program is behind it. There is a more disturbing version, that the image was not implanted, but became possible due to the coincidence of frequencies between the TV signal and a certain atmospheric state, as if the signal was not transmitted, but manifested, from another range of perception. And what we saw on the screen was not a transmission, it was an observation from the other side. And maybe whoever was watching from inside the room wasn't trying to scare. They were just checking where and when the line between signal and sight became thin enough for them to see them too, not as an obstacle, but as a reminder that the ether isn't empty. It's a layer, and someone knows how to enter it without noise, without hacking, just through the eye. Mysterious carving on mummy's body in Peru. In 1988, an archaeological team from Lima was conducting a routine excavation in the desert region of Nazca, at one of the inconspicuous burial sites belonging to the Paracas culture. Among dozens of ordinary finds, they unearthed a cloth-wrapped body. Everything pointed to standard mummification, the tight posture, the plant fibers, the folded shape. But when the body was uncovered, archaeologists noticed something that didn't fit with any known burial practices in the region. On the left side of the mummy's chest, under the ribs, there was a perfectly symmetrical cut, about 7 centimeters deep. Its shape resembled an oval, with clear, even edges, as if the body tissue had not been torn or cut, but cut out in one moment, as if by a laser. There were no cracks in the skin or signs of decomposition around it. Everything looked as if the cut had been made posthumously, but without any crude instrument. No organs were found inside the oval. The cavity was empty. The walls were smooth, with a shiny texture, as if the tissues had been heat-treated. Around the cutout were the finest incisions, reminiscent of surgical notches. But microscopic analysis showed that no known instrument could have left such a mark. At the same time, the mummy's skin itself was intact in the rest of the body. Scientists tried to explain the anomaly as a ritual manipulation related to religious rites. But such things were not found in other mummies in the region. There was not a single comparable find. Moreover, under ultraviolet light, the fabric in the area of the cutout began to glow faintly, as if it contained substances that were not detected by ordinary chemistry. They tested for metals, carbon compounds, even mineral residues, all negative. Then one of the samples was sent to a private lab in Germany. The result amazed everyone. The tissue structure in the area of the cut had an abnormally dense interweaving of collagen, characteristic not of a human, but of tissues that had undergone artificial reconstruction. This could not have happened in a body that had lain in the ground for more than 2,000 years. Later, one of the scientists who took part in the expedition said in a private conversation that the discovery scared the whole team. They could not understand what exactly they were holding in their hands. According to him, there was a feeling that the cutout was not just a trace, but an interface, an attempt to open something inside the body, or extract, but not at the organic level, but at an access point that someone has already used. After the initial analysis, access to the mummy was restricted. It was not displayed in a museum. It was not published in scientific journals. The archives fell silent. Only years later did fragments of information begin to emerge in alternative historian circles. Some believe that the cut was made by representatives of another civilization, not extraterrestrial, but ancient earthly, possessing technology capable of manipulating matter at the cellular level. Others are sure that this is not a mummy at all, but a carrier, a shell from which something important was extracted. Not a heart, not an organ, but a memory, a code, or even a voice. There are many burials in the deserts of Peru. Many of them are standard, but sometimes you find something that doesn't fit into the chronology. That doesn't fit with the cultural background, and it doesn't cause superstition, but rather an alarming clarity, because it's too precise, too even, too silent. If this discovery was not an accident, then it had a purpose. Perhaps the body was not opened by humans. Perhaps it lay there as a beacon, as a checkpoint, and the cut as a place where something once entered, or exited. Exactly. Without a trace, without an explanation, just a cut, and emptiness inside. Mysterious carving on mummy's body in Peru. In 1988, an archaeological team from Lima was conducting a routine excavation in the desert region of Nazca at an inconspicuous burial site belonging to the Paracas culture. Among dozens of ordinary finds, they unearthed a cloth-wrapped body. Everything pointed to standard mummification, the tight posture, the plant fibers, the curled shape. But when the body was uncovered, The archaeologists noticed something that did not fit with any known burial practices of the region. On the left side of the mummy's chest, under the ribs, there was a perfectly symmetrical cut about 7 centimeters deep. Its shape resembled an oval with clear, even edges, as if the body tissue had not been torn or cut, but cut out in one moment, as if with a laser. There were no cracks in the skin, no signs of decomposition around. Everything looked as if the cut had been made posthumously, but without any crude instrument. No organs were found inside the oval. The cavity was empty, the walls were smooth with a shiny texture, as if the tissues had been heat-treated. Around the cutout were the finest incisions, reminiscent of surgical notches, but microscopic analysis showed that no known instruments could have left such a mark. At the same time, the mummy's skin itself was untouched in the rest of the body. Scientists tried to explain the anomaly as a ritual manipulation related to religious rites, but such things were not found in other mummies in the region. There was not a single comparable find. Moreover, under ultraviolet light, the fabric in the area of the cut began to glow faintly, as if it contained substances that were not detected by ordinary chemistry. They tested for metals, carbon compounds, even mineral residues, all negative. Then one of the samples was sent to a private laboratory in Germany. The result amazed everyone. The structure of the tissue in the area of the cut had an abnormally dense interweaving of collagen, characteristic not of a person, but of tissues that had undergone artificial reconstruction. This could not have happened to a body that had lain in the ground for more than 2,000 years. Later, one of the scientists who took part in the expedition said in a private conversation that the discovery scared the whole team. They could not understand what exactly they were holding in their hands. According to him, there was a feeling that the cut was not just a trace, but an interface, an attempt to open something inside the body, or to extract, but not at the organic level, but at an access point that someone had once used. After the initial analysis, access to the mummy was restricted. It was not displayed in a museum. It was not published in scientific journals. The archives fell silent. Only years later did fragments of information begin to emerge in alternative historian circles. Some believe that the cut was made by representatives of another civilization, not extraterrestrial, but ancient earthly, possessing technology capable of manipulating matter at the cellular level. Others are sure that this is not a mummy at all, but a carrier, a shell from which something important was extracted. Not a heart, not an organ, but a memory, a code, or even a voice. There are many burials in the deserts of Peru. Many of them are standard, but sometimes you find something that doesn't fit into the chronology, that doesn't fit with the cultural background, and it doesn't cause superstition, but rather an alarming clarity, because it's too precise, too even, too silent. If this discovery was not an accident, then it had a purpose. Perhaps the body was not opened by humans. Perhaps it lay there as a beacon, as a checkpoint, and the cut as a place where something once entered, or exited, exactly, without a trace, without an explanation, just a cut, an emptiness inside. The unexplained death of Kenneth Arnold. Kenneth Arnold made history as the man who first publicly reported seeing flying saucers. On June 24, 1947, while piloting his private plane over the Cascade Mountains of Washington state, he spotted 9 objects flying at unnatural speeds and moving like pebbles bouncing on water. This incident marked the beginning of the entire American UFO era. However, few people know that decades after this event, Arnold died under extremely strange circumstances, and everything related to his latest research was quickly and completely deleted. By 1984, Arnold had retired from active flying, but continued to collect evidence of anomalous objects traveling across the country. In 1983, he announced that he was working on a secret report that would summarize everything he had learned over the decades. He mentioned that his archive contains materials provided by former military personnel and radio operators, including evidence of signals matching the frequency of noise recorded in low Earth orbit. A few months before his death, he told a journalist that he was preparing a speech demonstrating some visual evidence obtained in the 1950s, but not made public at the request of one of the agencies. He was sure that his saucers were neither Soviet nor natural phenomena, but represented technologies whose logic lay beyond the usual laws of aerodynamics. In May 1984, Arnold was found dead in his Idaho home. The cause of death was a heart attack. But in the room where he worked, all the documents had been removed. The safe was open. The tape reels were empty. His notebook with the coded notes was gone. Relatives claimed that just the day before he had appeared perfectly healthy, but in the weeks leading up to that, he had felt pressure, not physical, but psychological, as if someone was watching. The only surviving tape is a fragment of an interview in which Arnold utters a strange phrase. Some things are not made to be understood. They are made to be present. Later, one of the former BBC employees, who worked with ufologists at the time, claimed that Arnold really did collect unique material, including patterns of movement of objects with coincidences at different times and in different parts of the planet. All the trajectories converged on one node, an area of the Pacific Ocean southwest of the Aleutian Islands. This location, he said, systematically distorts radio waves and shows light bursts without a source. The question that still troubles researchers is not only that Arnold died before publication, but that everything he collected disappeared. There was no break-in. His relatives couldn't open his safe, and when they opened it, it turned out that the safe was empty, but not damaged, as if the contents had disappeared without being opened. Or, it wasn't there physically, but someone knew where it should have been. If Arnold was indeed getting closer to a solution, perhaps he had crossed the line where the observed object becomes the observer. In which case, the saucers he spoke of in 1947 were not the beginning, but an invitation to a route that has never flown in a straight line, and that ends not in the sky, but inside a person who has decided to listen to the silence beyond the clouds. The mystery of the disappearance of Malaysian flight MH370. On March 8, 2014, at 0:41 local time, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, a Boeing 777-200ER operating from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, took off with 239 people on board. 40 minutes after takeoff, the plane stopped responding to flight control requests. No distress signal, no navigation failure, no standard response. The connection was lost instantly, and one of the most mysterious disasters in the history of modern aviation began. Initial searches focused on the South China Sea along the supposed route, but it soon became clear that the plane had abruptly changed course, turning southwest and crossing the Strait of Malacca. This was confirmed by military radar. After that, MH370 disappeared from the screens for good. A few days later, it was revealed that the interpretation of satellite signals showed that the plane continued to fly for another 6 hours after losing contact, heading towards the southern Indian Ocean. It was impossible. The plane shouldn't have been in that area. There was enough fuel just until the end of the route. The plane's signal continued to reach the Inmarsat satellites, short handshakes once an hour. The last one was received at 8:19, which means the plane had been flying for almost 7 hours in an unknown direction. What happened on board is still unknown. There were versions of a hijacking, a catastrophe, a deliberate act by the pilot, but none of them explain the disappearance of the entire aircraft without debris, without floating objects, without radio communications. Only in 2015, a wing fragment, presumably from MH370, was found on Reunion Island. Later, several more fragments were found, but their identity has not been fully proven. The body itself, the black boxes, and the remains have not been found to this day. There are also accounts that are not officially acknowledged. One civil aviation pilot claimed to have spotted an unexplained dense blob on his radar while flying over the southern Indian Ocean, moving against the wind at incredible speeds. Other reports pointed to anomalies in the satellite transmission, fragments of a distorted signal that seemed to rewrite its own route. Some researchers believe that the disappearance is related to a non-classical phenomenon in geophysics, a kind of radio-silent funnel, an area where distortion of coordinates and time parameters can occur. Such hypotheses sound fantastic, but the question remains: if the plane flew for 6 hours after losing contact, why did not a single country on the route record its flight visually or by radar? There was a theory that the plane was removed intentionally, that it was switched off from the global tracking field. But this requires technology capable of simultaneously deceiving aviation, military systems, and satellites. This is not just a conspiracy. This is an operation that cannot be carried out without access to structures located outside state institutions, or vice versa. No one turned anything off. The plane simply left the accessible layer of perception, as if it continued to exist but outside the coordinate grid. And then it doesn't matter where it fell. What matters is that it went beyond the frame. And if this is so, the question is no longer what happened, but who else can get there, and when. The voice that stopped the plane August 20th, 1980, Narita Airport, Tokyo. A Japanese airline plane was preparing to take off for Osaka. There were 144 passengers on board. Everything was going according to plan. The runway was clear, the weather conditions were favorable, and the dispatcher gave permission for takeoff. At that moment, a voice came from the plane's radio system that should not have been there. He said only two phrases. First, in Japanese, "Stop, he's already inside." Then, in English, "Abort." The voice sounded smooth, without distortion, but it couldn't be detected by any radio station. The crew was stunned. The captain decided to abort the takeoff. The plane stopped seconds before it left the runway. At first, it was thought to be a technical glitch or a joke. But an analysis of the recordings showed that the signal did not come from outside. It did not pass through the antenna. It originated inside the cabin, as if it were built into the system. No ground transmitter recorded the transmission. Moreover, the airline confirmed that such a route did not intersect with other flights at that time. There was no interception. 2 hours after the flight was canceled, an inspection of the same plane revealed a crack in the right engine mount that could have led to a mid-air crash. Officially, this led to the incident being called a preventable incident. But it remains unclear. Who could have known about this in advance? An internal investigation began immediately. All participants were checked, from technicians to pilots. No one found any anomalies in the communications equipment. Even the radio transmitter unit was turned off at the moment of the signal. The cockpit voice recorder itself recorded the phrases, but without interference, without hissing, with an ideal sound frequency, typical for a studio recording. Later, one of the pilots in the cockpit said that the voice seemed familiar to him, not in content, but in intonation, in sensations. He described it as not his own, but from within, as if he heard his own thought, spoken by another voice. Rumors spread quickly. Newspapers called the incident spiritual intervention and a voice from the sky. Officially, the information was not commented on. But years later, in the closed archives of the Japanese Civil Aviation Agency, it was discovered that this was not the first such case. In 1973, while preparing to take off on another flight, a phrase was heard in the cockpit, "They're waiting up there. Don't fly." The crew ignored it. The plane crashed 40 minutes after takeoff. Cause: engine failure. The circumstances are still controversial. Some suggest that this is not about mysticism, but about the overlap of a time signal, as if part of the future entered the communication system, or as if the pilot's consciousness in an extreme situation activated an abnormal perception to hear what did not sound but should have sounded. If the voices were real, who sent them? And if they weren't real, how did they know something no one else knew? Perhaps it is not the voice that matters, but the moment when a decision must be made, but cannot be made by a person. Then something else is turned on, not a language, not a warning, but a corridor, through which comes not a distress signal, but a choice. Between routes, between outcomes, between lives that have already gone down one path and those who may yet stop. The double disappearance of Linda and Christina Morrison. In 1997, an event occurred in Oregon that remains unexplained. Linda Morrison, 34, and her daughter Christina, 11, left their home in the small town of Springfield around 9 a.m. They were heading to a nearby shopping center. According to witnesses, they got into the car, drove onto the highway, and disappeared forever. Not a single camera, not a single call, not a single transaction after leaving the house. No body, no car, no trace. Initial versions concerned an escape. But Linda was known as a responsible mother, worked as an accountant in a city clinic, had a stable income, was not in debt, and had no enemies or criminal connections. Her daughter was an excellent student, with no signs of depression or problems. The house was in order. Food was on the stove. The iron was turned off. The entire route to the shopping center took no more than 20 minutes. The police began combing the highways, bodies of water, fields, forests. No signs of braking, no fragments of the car. In the area where Linda was supposed to be driving, the road surveillance system recorded an anomaly. For 17 seconds, the cameras recorded a gap in the image. The image shook, blurred, then stabilized. In this interval, there was not a single car. The traffic jumps forward as if a segment of the recording was cut out or the time structure was shifted. 3 weeks after the disappearance, a truck driver reported seeing a woman and child who looked like Linda and Christina at a gas station in Idaho. He claimed they were standing at a soda machine but were acting weird, as if they didn't understand how it worked. When he approached, they went around the corner. The gas station cameras showed only silhouettes, blurred as if in unstable focus. Not a single face could be identified. Then, silence. For 10 years, no trace. Until 2007, when an internet user posted an anonymous message on a forum describing a woman in a gray jacket staring in one direction for 3 hours at a campsite near the forest. He claimed he approached her, but she didn't respond, as if she was looking through everything. When he blinked, she was gone. It is suspicious that the username, KAIM1997LMN, contains initials and the date of disappearance. The account address is registered in Canada. The account was deleted after 2 days. The forum closed after a month. Researchers of anomalous phenomena put forward a hypothesis. Perhaps we are talking about the phenomenon of a time rift, in which a certain point in space loses synchronization with the rest of the world for a short time. Those who get there do not die, but are shifted. Not to another place, but to non-time, from which you can see the world, but not enter it. If so, Linda and Christina haven't disappeared. They're just standing in another layer, on the same track, on the same route, waiting, or not waiting, just watching, because maybe they're still here. Only no one can reach through the minute that was moved by someone or something that knows how the route works, but doesn't explain why it needs to be interrupted at this exact moment. Ghosts of Belms, faces on the floor. In August 1971, in the small Spanish town of Belmes de la Moraleda, the Pereira family noticed a strange stain on the kitchen floor. It seemed as if a face had appeared on the cement tiles, with unclear but recognizable features: eyes, mouth, eyebrows. At first they decided that it was a stain from moisture or soot and tried to erase it. But the stain did not disappear, and after a few days it only became clearer. And then new ones appeared. On the walls, on the floor, even under the furniture. Dozens of faces, not identical, as if each figure was a personality. Rumors spread instantly. The house became a place of pilgrimage. Scientists, journalists, paranormal researchers came to check the authenticity. There were experiments. Sections of cement were painted over, covered, sealed under glass. But after a few weeks, the faces returned, sometimes different, sometimes the same, but with altered expressions. There were even photographs where the faces changed over time, as if they were aging, as if they were watching. Chemical analysis of the surface revealed no traces of pigments, dyes, or chemicals. In one case, when the tile was removed and taken to a lab in Madrid, the image began to disappear. But a day later, it reappeared, in another place in the house, on the ceiling under the stairs. It was as if the meaning of the images was not in the material, but in the very structure of the space. The authorities considered the possibility of a hoax. The Pereira family was accused of forgery, but no expert could reproduce the effect. Moreover, the facial lines passed through the newly poured concrete sections without interruption. Geophysicists suggested that there might be a burial site under the house. During excavations, human remains were discovered, without coffins, without burial accessories. Age, about 400 years. The bones were removed, but the faces continued to appear. Later, one of the researchers who worked in the house for a month described how at a certain time of day there would be complete silence. Even the sounds of the street seemed to fade away. And in this silence, the images began to change. He noticed that some faces repeated themselves like a cycle, as if they returned in a certain sequence. And once, at night, he claimed that the face on the wall moved its eyelid. Some believe that Belms is a place of memory, where the space captures not just death, but the tension of emotions, fear, pain, frozen in the structure of the building. Not ghosts in the usual sense, but emotional traces emerging in dense matter, like images on developed film. Others suggest that the house has fallen into a time node, where the past does not go away, but seeps through. And these faces are not dead, but those who live around, in another layer of perception. And when the border between the layers becomes thin, they look out. The house in Belms still exists. The faces appear less often, but they haven't disappeared completely. Sometimes they return after years, with different expressions. And if you get there, don't look for them with your eyes. Just stop and wait, because they're already looking. And maybe one of the figures wasn't there before, but it won't go away now. Signal from under the Arctic ice, Sleeping Titan. In 2010, a research vessel monitoring tectonic activity in the Arctic detected an unusual low-frequency signal coming from beneath deep layers of ice off the Greenland shelf. At first it was mistaken for a seismic shock, but the signal did not have the characteristic structure of Earth vibrations. It was smooth, pulsating, like the beats of a huge heart, and repeated at regular intervals. The signal was recorded by 4 different stations, scattered over hundreds of kilometers. Its amplitude was stable. The frequency was below the threshold of human hearing. At the same time, sensitive equipment began to overheat, despite the outside temperature of -20 degrees. After 23 hours of broadcasting, the signal suddenly stopped, as if someone had turned it off. When scientists tried to get closer to the source, the icebreaker encountered an unexpected obstacle. A probe launched into an ice crack transmitted an image showing a structure below that resembled a rounded stone surface, but with a symmetrical geometric pattern, as if something there was not of natural origin. Officials halted further exploration, citing the danger of the route. Internal reports leaked to the press spoke of an undefined density structure and used the term stable resonant activity of unknown origin. Later, a former project employee who hid his name said that within 2 weeks of the signal being turned off, anomalous ice domes began to appear on some parts of the shelf, perfectly round, without cracks and with a temperature 15 degrees higher than the surrounding temperature. They were soon leveled with the surface, but before that, secondary vibrations were recorded from the surface of one of these anomalies, similar to an echo from within. Some researchers have dubbed the source of the signal the Sleeping Titan, like something ancient, buried deep within the planet, and now giving a brief sign of activity, not as a threat, as a reminder of its presence. There are versions that we are talking about an ancient technogenic structure, left long before the existence of the current civilization. Or vice versa, about a geoorganism existing in a slow phase of life, in which one breath can last a century. Then the signal is not communication, but part of awakening. If so, the question is not what the object is. The question is why it signaled now. And if it was sleeping, what was its alarm? Maybe something in the world changed, or someone called it. Or maybe we just happened to be on the same wavelength it had been listening to all this time. And then the silence in the Arctic is not emptiness. It is an interval between awakenings, between blows that do not repeat, but always lead to one thing, the moment when he hears us, or wants us to hear him. The mystery of the man in the iron mask. The story of a mysterious prisoner who was locked up in a French prison in the 17th century and wore an iron or velvet mask on his face remains one of the darkest mysteries in European history. No one ever called him by name. He never appeared in public. His identity was strictly confidential, and everyone who came into contact with him signed an oath of silence. His captors did not know who they were guarding. Only one thing was clear. He was dangerous, not as a criminal, but as a fact of existence. Arrested around 1669 and transferred to several prisons, including the famous Bastille, the masked prisoner lived in complete isolation for almost 30 years. There is no written evidence of his origin. All official papers and reports were destroyed or edited, but some fragments survive. One note says, "He must not speak, not a word, and must not be identified even after death." There have been many versions of his identity. The illegitimate brother of King Louis XIV, the heir to the throne who was kept hidden, a general who knew too much, but none have been confirmed. The body was buried under a false name. The grave was unmarked. The skull was gone. The strangest thing came later. In 1794, a century after his death, a French archivist discovered a room behind the false wall of the Bastille that no one knew about. Inside is a void and an engraving on the stone. He who saw is silent. He who knew is not alive. This fragment was carved into the stone in a mirror-like manner, as if it was intended to be read through a reflection. In the 19th century, writer Victor Hugo hinted that there was a manuscript written by a masked man, but no one had seen it. Some claimed that the text was not in French, but in a special cipher, where letters were replaced by symbols. One of the supposed decipherers later disappeared. There is a theory that the masked man was not a political threat, but a bearer of knowledge that could not be destroyed, but also could not be allowed to spread. Perhaps he witnessed a meeting, a phenomenon, or an event that undermined the foundations of the world of that time. And then the mask is not a way of humiliation, but an isolating device, not only from the eyes, but also from words. Some researchers believe that the mask could have been not iron, but lead with internal inserts. Such masks were used in alchemical rituals to seal information. And if the person in the mask kept not a name, but an image, then perhaps his task was not to remain silent, but to hold back what cannot be said. He died, but he didn't forget, because if the truth is even a step closer, then his existence wasn't a mistake. It was a structural protection against leakage, and then the one wearing the mask wasn't a prisoner, but a guardian. And the question is not who he was, but what was stored in him, and was it ever extracted, or is it waiting for the next wearer? Dagger Boy stone with incomprehensible symbols. In 1933, on the banks of the Kennebec River in Maine, USA, a boy named Benjamin Duggar found a dark, smooth stone, partially sunken in the sand. The stone was shaped like an oblong oval and weighed just under a kilogram. On its surface were carved symbols that did not resemble any known alphabet. These were curved, sharp, and twisted lines, forming a structure similar to a cipher or an ancient map. The boy's family preserved the find and gave it to a local museum, not suspecting that decades later the artifact would become the subject of a real investigation. Scientists who studied the stone in the 1950s were unable to attribute it to any archaeological layer in the region. The engraving was too precise. The edges of the cuts were perfectly smooth, as if they had been made by a tool that cut molecules rather than stone. The stone itself turned out to be made of volcanic rock, which is not found within a radius of hundreds of miles. In 1971, one of the cryptographers, a professor at Brown University, tried to decipher the symbols, considering them as writing. He came to the conclusion that the structure resembled a programming language, only not linear, but fractal, in which the symbols are responsible not for letters, but for modulating meanings. His work was never published, but drafts have survived. They contain a phrase underlined in red: "He does not speak, he calls." Legend has it that in the 1980s, after the stone was on display in a traveling exhibition, 3 visitors reported a recurring dream in which they stood on the shore and stone figures rose from under the water. The 3 were strangers to each other, but they described the same landscape: a smooth, flooded shore, a huge star in the sky, and a shadow under the water. In 1996, the stone disappeared. Officially, it was lost during transportation. In reality, the expedition that transported the collection said that when unloading the box containing the artifact, the weight was 1.7 kilograms less than it should have been. Neither the lid nor the locks were damaged. All the items inside were in place, except for one thing: the stone. Later, fakes began to appear in private collections, copies with the same symbols, but none had the same resonant frequency that the devices recorded when approaching the original. Because yes, the stone had its own sound response, recorded on ultrasound, short pulses that coincided with the modulations of delta waves of the human brain. Some believe that the Dagger Boy stone is an artifact left as a test contact, a piece of code that must be found and read, not with words, but with perception. Perhaps the symbols are not text, but an activation system. And the stone itself is not a relic, but a trigger, starting an event not in place, but in time. As if, when you stare at it for too long, it doesn't wait for you to understand. It waits for you to respond. Missing crew of the ship Carol A. Deering. In January 1921, the 2-masted schooner Carol A. Deering was found washed up on the beach at Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. The vessel was upright, with no damage to the hull, and her sails were partially raised but not in working order. However, there was not a single crew member aboard. Everyone was gone: captain, officers, and men. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no bodies. Just a strange, silent emptiness that had enveloped the vessel. The ship was new, built in 1919, well-equipped. A few days before the disappearance, the crew was spotted in ports. Everything seemed normal. But on the last day of navigation, the captain sent a short message: "Officers are acting strange. Intervention is required." Immediately after that, the connection was lost. When the Coast Guard came aboard, they found the wheel secured, the cabins neatly tidied, the food cooked. A kettle was boiling in the galley. The wardroom was full of chairs, one of them overturned. The logbook was gone. The boats were missing. All the clocks had stopped at the same time. But what was especially striking was the find in the captain's cabin, an open map of the Atlantic on which something resembling a loop encircling the Bermuda Triangle had been drawn in pencil, although the triangle itself was not yet part of the mass consciousness. In the margins was a note: "No return, they won't let go." Experts tried to explain the disappearance of the crew: a storm, piracy, mutiny, drowning. But none of the versions were supported by the facts. The weather was stable, the cargo on board remained untouched, and the boats were never found. even years later. It was later revealed that a week before the disappearance, the Carroll A. Deering had called at a port where the crew reported strange behavior from one of the sailors. He said that at night, he heard creaks not from the wood, but from inside his head. He wrote symbols in a notebook that resembled old navigational codes, but with shifts. One day he claimed that the ship is not moving forward, but is sailing in a circle in a dream. There were rumors that this was not the first case in that region. The archives contain references to other ships found in the same waters, silently drifting, empty, with a barely audible hum in the hull, as if the metal resonated with something not outside, but inside the route itself. Some believe that Carroll A. Deering passed through an anomalous time warp zone in which consciousness loses synchronicity with physical space. People disappear not as bodies, but as structures of perception, leaving behind only a shadow of presence. Or, the route was violated, an invisible threshold was crossed, beyond which the sea no longer returns. The ship was burned a month later, so as not to attract attention, but the rumor remained. And if you find yourself on the coast of Cape Hatteras on a particularly quiet night, they say you can hear the whisper of canvas emerging from the fog, as if someone is still trying to turn back, only not to the shore anymore, but to the moment where everything disappeared. The sounds of the noise of the earth are a global phenomenon. Since the early 2010s, strange sound phenomena have been recorded around the world. A low-frequency hum coming from nowhere, similar to a roar, a mechanical hum, or a distant trumpet signal. It has been called by various names: the hum of the earth, the call of metal, the hum of heaven. But the essence is the same. The sound appears in the complete absence of a source, lasts from several seconds to half an hour, and disappears as suddenly as it appears. It is heard simultaneously in different places: in the north of Canada, in Mexico, in Russia, Germany, Australia. Sometimes synchronously, sometimes with an interval of days, but with an absolutely identical spectrum. Recordings of the phenomenon posted online collect millions of views. People describe it as something between pipes and breathing, a vibration that enters the chest, a sound that makes you want to stop and not move. Some feel fear. Others start to feel nauseous, have a headache. Some hear nothing, but devices record bursts of infrasound at that moment. Scientists put forward versions: atmospheric resonances, microseisms, man-made sources. But in a number of cases, the sound arose in places remote from cities, without geological disturbances, and in complete silence. None of the hypotheses explains why the sound spectrum is practically the same, despite the geographical difference. Once in Canada, a group of specialists tried to direct highly sensitive microphones to a sound source, but the devices recorded not the direction, but the entire space, as if the sound was not emitted, but arose inside perception. Analysis of the recordings showed that the structure of the hum is not random. It contains a modulation with a certain rhythm, similar to the frequency of alpha brain waves in a state of anxiety. In some cases, animals left the area before the sound appeared. Birds fell silent, and pressure surges were recorded in the atmosphere. In others, the sound occurred in complete isolation, inside houses, as if it was not coming from outside, but turned on inside the building. One woman in Finland claimed to have heard the sound right in her pillow, only in her pillow, nowhere else. There have been cases where the hum has been accompanied by electrical failures, GPS shutdowns, and even demagnetization of compasses. These phenomena have been recorded but not explained. Infrasound wave doesn't match. Tectonic activity, no epicenters, secret projects, too global, too chaotic. Some theorists believe that the noise of the Earth is the voice of the planet itself, but not metaphorically, literally. That there are vibrations within the core that become audible under certain conditions. Others believe that this is an attempt at communication, either with us or between other structures outside the human circuit. And there is a third version, the most disturbing one, that it is not a sound, but an activation. That at this moment the world becomes accessible to something on the other side, and that the sound is not a sign of a failure, but a signal that the door is open. And then the noise of the Earth is not a natural phenomenon. It is the whisper of a system we mistakenly thought was mute, too quiet to speak, and too far away to listen, until it decided to start. The mystery of the Mary King Mirror in Edinburgh. Hidden beneath the cobbled streets and ornate arches of Edinburgh's Old Town is a subterranean level called Close Mary King's, once buried and forgotten. It was open to visitors in the late 20th century and turned into a museum. But among all the stories connected with this place, One scares even the workers of the complex. It is a mirror standing in the former living room where, according to rumors, Mary King herself stayed. At first glance, it is an ordinary rectangular mirror in an antique frame, but there are more than a dozen documented cases associated with it. Visitors complained of nausea, disorientation, and a sudden feeling of fear. Some said they saw someone else in the reflection, not themselves, not a ghost, not a hazy figure, a clear image of a person looking straight into the eyes, but not repeating the movements. Experiments conducted with thermal imagers and IR cameras did not reveal any anomalies, but one of the researchers noted that the mirror did not reflect light fully, as if it partially absorbed it, especially at the edges. The inner layer of the amalgam was strangely dense, with an admixture of a substance not typical of glass of that era. The study revealed the presence of a thin metallic layer, which included compounds of silver and bismuth, an extremely rare combination not used in the production of mirrors. The story goes that the mirror had been in the house since the 17th century. In 1645, during the plague, the mistress of the house died in that very room, in front of the mirror. Local legends say that she refused to leave the house so as not to infect others, and died in isolation. After her death, the mirror was covered, and it was not taken down for almost 100 years. When the mirror was returned to the exhibition, strange things started happening right away. In 1997, a tourist from France left in a panic, claiming that he saw his daughter standing behind him. The problem is that he arrived alone. Later, cameras recorded him looking in the mirror, taking a step back and falling. There is a recording, but there is no one behind him. The workers of the dungeon, when cleaning the exhibit, try not to look at the reflection. One of the caretakers admitted that at a certain time of day, around 1633, the mirror becomes cloudy, as if it were fogged up from the inside. But the temperature in the room does not change. Some believe that Mary King's mirror is not an object, but a window, a point of overlap between two time layers. And what appears in it are not spirits, but alternative observers. Those on the other side trying to understand who we are, what we look like, and when we will be vulnerable. And then the question is not what you see in the reflection, but when the reflection stops being you and becomes someone who has been watching for too long, and one day wants to look outside, no longer through the glass, but straight through you. The Devil's Library, Codex Gigas. The Royal Library of Sweden houses one of the most mysterious manuscripts in history, the Codex Gigas, or Giant Book. This is the largest medieval book in the world, almost a meter in height, weighing more than 70 kilograms. It is made of 160 donkey skins, contains 620 pages, written in perfectly even handwriting, without visible deviations, without drafts, without corrections, as if it was written by one hand and with one breath. The book dates back to the 13th century. According to monastery legend, it was written by a Benedictine monk who was sentenced to death for an unnamed crime. To avoid execution, he promised to create a book in one night that would contain all of humanity's knowledge. When midnight came, he realized he was running out of time, and as the story goes, he summoned the devil himself to help him finish the job. The deal was done. And in the center of the book, on an entire page, is a single figure, a huge demon, drawn with anatomical precision but without a trace of fear. He does not frighten. He watches. Inside is the complete Old Testament, medical treatises, alchemical diagrams, laws, stories of fallen angels, advice on exorcism, and magical practices. Everything is written in the same handwriting, as if the author had never stopped. Scientists have analyzed the ink. It is identical on all pages. This is impossible without repreparation. But here, not a single color is different. More importantly, there are blank pages between some chapters, perfectly inscribed, but without text. Their purpose is unknown. Some experts claim that these are missing chapters, but there is an opinion that the pages are activated by certain lighting or temperature. Several attempts to heat them under IR lighting showed the appearance of slight shadows, as if the text was hidden deep within the layer. The physical condition of the book is unique. The leather cover does not crack despite its age. The paper does not dry out. Restorers claim that the book feels not like paper, but like living material. Some are afraid to touch it. What is especially strange is that there is a pause in the content of the book. Between sections, there is a gap of several dozen pages on which there is not a word, only patterned lines along the edges, similar to a pulse. Some claim that if you look at them for a long time, a rhythm appears, a heart rhythm, whose is unknown. The Codex Gigas was never copied. No complete copy exists. Those who tried to digitize it complained of technical failures. One scanner operator claimed to hear a soft voice reading the Latin text in his headphones, even though the audio feed was turned off. He later gave up. Maybe it's just a legend, or the result of one man's incredible work. But if the book really was written by more than just the monk's hand, then another question arises. Who was it written for? Because maybe it's not meant to be read, it's meant to be watched. And every time you turn the page, it remembers. Not you, but the moment you started to believe that its meaning was greater than its words. And maybe the demon on the page itself is not the author, but the reader, who will one day see that you have reached the right place, and will cease to be an image. Silent city in Italy, Craco. In the south of Italy, in the Basilicata region, among the hills and cliffs, stands the abandoned city of Craco. It seems to be carved out of the rock, narrow streets, churches without bells, houses in which there are still tables and beds, but no one. The city is abandoned, but not destroyed, and that is what makes it so strange. Craco was founded in the 8th century, survived invasions, epidemics, wars, but it did not disappear. Until 1963, when its residents began to leave one after another, first because of landslides, then because of cracks in the buildings. But in fact, the reason was deeper. People left not because the city was collapsing, but because it was becoming impossible to live with. Locals said that at night, objects in houses began to ring, although there was no wind. In some apartments, things moved, clocks stopped, mirrors became cloudy. One priest claimed that every night he heard footsteps on the stairs leading to the attic where no one lived. He was transferred to another parish. Then the dreams began. People saw the same images, an empty square, a faceless man standing in the center. At some point, all the residents decided it was time to leave. Not because of the landslide, but because the city stopped seeing them, as if it had excluded them from itself. Architects who surveyed Craco in the 1980s noticed that the street structure violated urban planning principles. The streets go nowhere. Some staircases end in a wall. And if you superimpose the city plan on a star map, the streets match the pattern of one of the ancient Greek constellations, now almost forgotten. There is also a strange phenomenon: oral silence. The equipment installed in the city center does not record echoes. Whispers are lost. Voices do not reverberate. It is as if the place absorbs sound. One researcher described the sensation: you speak, and the world simply refuses to respond. Craco has become a filming location, but camera operators complain that the equipment malfunctions in the city center. Cameras switch off. Microphones produce background noise. One director refused to continue working after a recording in one of the rooms captured a female voice saying a phrase in Latin, although no one was in the scene. The city is officially recognized as a historical monument, but no one returns there. Not a single house is inhabited. Not a single business is open. Tourists come and go. Everyone says the same thing: there is nothing to see there, but you want to leave immediately. Some believe that Craco is not just an abandoned city. It is a structure that has completed its function. It was inhabited. Now it is a memory that does not want to be reconsidered. Perhaps it does not preserve traces of people, but a space where something once happened, and now must remain closed. And then Craco's silence is not a consequence of destruction, but a choice of the place itself, to remain silent until someone asks the wrong question, or until they start hearing footsteps on the stairs leading up to a room where no one lives, but where someone has already stood up. Long shadow caves in Turkey. In southeastern Turkey, near the city of Midyat, there is a network of caves known locally as the Caves of the Long Shadows. This is not a tourist attraction, but rather a confusing labyrinth of natural and man-made tunnels, most of which have never been fully explored. The first mentions of them date back to the pre-Assyrian period, but most archaeologists believe that the caves are much older than official dates suggest. The light here does not behave as usual. Even with lanterns or spotlights, the shadows from objects lengthen and move, as if they obey not the light source, but a different geometry. People who have descended inside have described that a shadow can appear in front of a person and not behind. Sometimes shadows do not match the shape of the object. One archaeologist exploring the entrance hall noticed that his own shadow was reflected off the wall in the form of another silhouette, shorter and with outstretched arms. Some tunnels lead to dead ends, others loop, returning the traveler to the same place, but with differences. The stones are shifted, the patterns on the walls are changed, the same passage can lead to different sections. Inside, symbols carved into the walls resemble cuneiform, but are unidentifiable. One recurring image is of a faceless man standing in an arch. In some corridors, the echo does not return. It is absorbed. It disappears. In 1992, a group of speleologists conducted a 5-day expedition. One of the participants, a physicist from Ankara, recorded a decrease in air density, although the pressure did not change. His report included the phrase, "It is not the absence of sound, it is the deafness of space." Some surveillance cameras recorded movements in the empty halls, as if someone was passing through the frame. Thermal imagers showed flashes of temperature in the shape of a human body, but in areas where there was no access. Once, a thermal silhouette appeared directly behind one researcher and disappeared when he turned around. No one else went down there without an escort. According to one hypothesis, the caves may be part of an ancient system created not for life, but for isolation. Perhaps they hid from someone, or something, or maybe something was sealed. And the architecture of the labyrinth is needed not for convenience, but to confuse the space itself, so that no one could reach the center. Locals claim that at night they hear muffled thuds from underground, like footsteps. One shepherd said that he saw a silhouette on the slope, casting a shadow, but without a body, and his dog ran away and did not return. And if the shadows in these caves move on their own, maybe they are not about light, but about presence. And then you are not just entering a cave. You are entering a place where your own form becomes a record, and everything you do is already written in shadows that do not duplicate. But remember, the true story of the bell ringer of Notre Dame. Almost everyone has heard of Hugo's novel about the hunchback Quasimodo, the bell ringer of the Parisian Notre Dame Cathedral. But few know that in the archives of the 19th century, there is evidence of a real bell ringer who lived in the basement of the cathedral. And this story is much darker than the literary image. In the second half of the 1830s, in the plans of the architect Lassus, who restored the cathedral after the revolutionary devastation, an unknown person living on the territory of the building is mentioned. He was not on the staff, did not receive a salary, but every evening and morning the bells struck accurately, even if none of the workers entered the belfry. The monks and workers called him by many names: the Silent One, the Old Shadow, the Stone Step. He did not speak. He did not show himself in the light, but they saw him, a hunched figure, long arms, a hood. Some said his face was unnaturally elongated, as if time had distorted his features. Others said he cast no shadow as he moved past the candles. One carpenter left the cathedral after he heard breathing above him while climbing the spiral staircase at night, but saw no one. Another claimed to have found an inscription on the wall: "He is not a man, he is a memory." In 1842, a group of students from the Sorbonne, inspired by Hugo's novel, decided to spend the night in the cathedral. The next morning, they were found unconscious at the entrance. One of them, waking up, repeated, "He was looking at me, but he was behind me." None of them ever returned to studying the history of architecture. After this, access to the upper levels of the belfry was avoided. Several years later, restorers discovered a mummified body in a niche between the walls, wrapped in cloth with scraps of parchment. Inside were not books, but stones into which Latin phrases were scratched. The translation of one of them: "The voice is not a sound, the voice is a repetition." The body was transferred to the archives. His name, if he had one, was not established. But the bells continued to ring, even when the bell ringers left the cathedral, even when the mechanism was turned off. Today, Notre Dame is a tourist destination. But some employees claim that on particularly quiet evenings, they can hear someone walking up the stone stairs, slowly, with heavy steps. They say it is not a memory or a legend. It is someone who has stayed to keep the cathedral from falling silent, not because he is alive, but because he is sound. And then the question is not whether the bell ringer was a real person, but that he rang the bell not for the city, but so that someone else could hear, not from outside, but from inside the wall. Cases of spontaneous human combustion. Spontaneous human combustion is one of the most frightening and difficult to explain phenomena. People literally burst into flames before the eyes of witnesses, turning to ashes in a matter of minutes, while surrounding objects, furniture, clothes, even paper nearby, remain virtually untouched. There are no traces of flammable substances on the body. And most importantly, there is no source of fire. Everything happens suddenly, without reason, and without a trace of arson. The first recorded case dates back to the 17th century, but incidents continue to be reported in the 20th and 21st centuries. One of the most famous cases occurred in 1951 in Florida. In the apartment, it was discovered that the plastic objects around the victim had not melted, only a greasy shadow remained on the floor. The forensic experts were at a loss. In another case, in London in 1982, a man suddenly caught fire in the middle of the street, as if from within, according to witnesses. He tried to put out the flames, but they did not come from his clothes, but seemed to flare up from his body itself. He died at the scene. The autopsy revealed no traces of gasoline or kerosene. The liver and organs were destroyed by the high temperature, but the shirt was intact. Modern explanations range from rare metabolic reactions to the candle effect, where body fat can supposedly burn like a wick under the right circumstances. But in most cases, there were no conditions for this. The combustion temperature was too high. The combustion rate was contrary to physics. And most importantly, people caught fire without a spark. Some researchers suggest that the phenomenon may be based not on external influences, but on a malfunction in the electromagnetic system of the body. There are electric currents in the human body. In extreme disturbances, it is possible that a local field could form that could resonate with an external source, such as a radio signal or microwave. But this theory remains speculative. There is evidence that in some cases, before spontaneous combustion, people complained of headaches, ringing in the ears, and a sharp drop in blood pressure. This may indicate a neurophysiological trigger, as if the body itself were starting the process of self-destruction. The question is, why? Alternative theories claim that spontaneous combustion is not a mistake, but a process of exit, perhaps even a departure from the dense world. That flame is not destruction, but a form of transformation, not death, but a transition. And if even one such story is true, then we are dealing not just with an inexplicable death, but with the moment when a person becomes a flame, not a metaphor, but literally. When life does not end, but flares up, and in this flare-up, not pain, but a return. Some mysteries are being solved. Others are lost forever. But there are those who continue to live close by, like a parallel fabric folded at our very steps. We feel them, in a strange shadow on the wall, in a sudden silence behind us, in a sound that seemed to sound only in your head. These are not coincidences. These are not myths. This is something that has not disappeared. It just no longer speaks out loud. 72 stories, from different countries, eras, cultures, not connected to each other, but still too similar to be accidental. Something erased, something cut out, something left, and waits for someone to start listening differently. Not with the eyes, not with devices, but with attention that recognizes not the meaning, but the silence between the words. Because the real mystery isn't what happened. It's why we keep feeling like it's not over yet.